Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Tonight, I have a very special broadcast. This is not my normal night to do live streams for Rabbit Hole Radio, but it could not be avoided. Tonight, I decided to go live with my special co host, Mr. Steve Starr. Steve, welcome to the broadcast.
Good to be along with you again. Good to be along with you again. Yeah, it's we have a real dilemma here. A sightseeing tour apparently of some sort that is lost in the depths of the vicinity of the Titanic shipwreck, and I'm not even sure if they're located anywhere near it at this point. We're going to try to get some updates. You got a recording from the Coast Guard, as I understand. As you folks may know, about 900 miles to the east of Cape Cod, 400 miles to the southeast of Newfoundland is where the Titanic shipwreck is at 12,500 feet. That's well over 2 miles, almost 2.5. And there is a lost group of sightseers in a submersible, and there is no indication of where they are at this point right now, as I understand.
Yes, that is correct. And that's why we are going live tonight. Because, as many of you know, Steve and I, over the years, well, I mean, it's been over like 15 years now, have done multiple shows about the Titanic. And when I woke up this morning and saw the news on this, I had mixed emotions about it. And then I contacted you today, Steve, and I was like, uh, have you seen the news? You need to see what's going on. And it's just been kind of a complete mess. And I've been following the story all day long, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. So I decided to hit you up and see if you wanted to do a live stream, special broadcast about this tonight with me. So we're going to be live streaming for a little while tonight, covering the news, going over what's going on, giving our take on things, and just presenting what we know so far for the audiences out there. And considering it covers the Titanic, I again wanted to discuss this with Steve, because Steve and I have spent like the last 15 years covering the Titanic and the mystery surrounding the sinking of the Titanic and the conspiracy that is involved behind the scenes. And him and I'll touch on a few things there about that tonight. But we're going to be mainly focusing on the missing submersible and what's going on with that. And I have a press conference actually from the U.S. Coast Guard that they did earlier today, discussing the submersible and what's going on. So I'm going to play that.
Right on.
It's about 15, 20 minutes long. So I'm going to play that in a little bit and go over like the submersible itself. And it's just kind of it's an all around sad story, because if you really think about it, I mean, the Titanic is over 2 miles down. It's almost 13,000 feet to the bottom of the ocean floor where the Titanic is sitting. That's super deep. I don't think people realize how deep that is, but it's extremely deep. The pressures down there are incredible, Steve. Um, I I just can't imagine the the terror of being inside of a little tube at that type of depth, being cut off from communications. And we're going to get into different scenarios, but I honestly don't think this is going to turn out well. I don't think this is going to turn out like a 70s flick, like Airport 77, where the plane crashes into the ocean and the Navy gets there in time, and they put the balloons under the plane and they raise it up. Ironically, Radchick and I just watched that film yesterday, and it's kind of weird. We watched that film last night, and this morning we wake up and the submersible whole thing is going on. But I have mixed emotions about this. I really do. I don't think people should be diving on that wreck site. I think if they're going to be diving on the wreck site, it should be to do things like they did recently where they mapped it and they did a whole like 3D rendering of it, where you can now go on YouTube and digitally take a tour of it. Okay. Sit in your living room or in your office or on your laptop or with your tablet, wherever, in a very comfortable, safe environment, and take a tour of it. I do not think you should be able to dive on it. And I'm not for a police state. You know me. I'm not about that. But I do not believe that you should be able to go and I don't think you should be able to go touring it. I don't think that should be allowed. It's a grave site. And like James Cameron called it, a crime scene. I
That's
don't
right.
think you should. I
Mhm.
don't think you should be able to tour it. I mean, that's after researching what went on there. I mean, I've been an avid Titanic guy since I was a little kid. But after researching it as a possible crime scene for the past 15 years, uh, and being a sailor myself, I was in the Coast Guard, and then just researching the Titanic itself as a shipwreck from the time I was a little kid. I don't think you should be. I think it's super disrespectful for these billionaires to be hopping in, or multi millionaires to be hopping in submersibles, because they've got the money to do so, and oh, it's a new form of tourism for the wealthy elites to be able to hop in a submersible and go to the bottom of the ocean and see the Titanic. I, you know, it's super disrespectful. Just because you've got the money to do so doesn't mean you should.
Well, it's a dangerous hobby, that's for sure. The person, the French mariner, I guess it's Paul Henry Nargeolet, I suppose, since it's French, the way it's spelled, Nargeolet. He's feared aboard the missing Titanic sightseeing sub. It's called the Titan. One of the leading experts, he is one of the leading experts on the Titanic, is feared to be among the 5 people who went missing on a tourist submersible visiting the wreckage. Now, apparently, they're pretty close to the location of where the wreck site is, Popeye. Uh, Nargeolet was named in Facebook a post by a fellow Voyager, and that was Hamish Harding, a UK billionaire and aviator, a day before the mission. So you can read a little bit more about him. 5 persons are on the submersible, reported overdue Sunday night. There was one submersible commander and 4 mission specialists on board. The search is being led by the U.S. Coast Guard in Boston. The submersible had a 96-hour oxygen supply. I think they're down to about 60 hours at best right now. The 5-person submersible weighs about 20,000 pounds and is capable of diving to 13,120 feet. Titanic's a little shy of that at 12.5. But still, that's very, very dangerous depth. UK billionaire Hamish Harding is reported on board the submersible, and we're trying to get the best on this right now. The latest news, there hasn't been anything you would think that they could have emerged by this time if something went wrong, but I don't know that there's any communication or anything with the submersible right now. Have you heard that at all, Popeye?
No, they lost communication about an hour and 45 minutes. I think it was about an hour. They said about an hour and 45 minutes into its initial dive. And that was yesterday. It was Sunday. And that was the last time they've had any communication with it. And since then, they haven't been able to reach it. Now, it's not like um, when to understand for the general public, because a lot of people are like, well, why can't they just locate it on GPS? It's not that easy. So you can't, when you're dealing with the ocean, it's different. It's not like dealing with the air, and it's not like dealing with the ground. So it's not like dealing with planes or cars. The water is very dense and it creates a lot of communication problems. So submarines don't use regular radio waves. If Joe Joseph were still awake, he's probably sleeping, but if he were still awake, I would drag him on here. And he would be able to explain to you about radio communications at sea and in the air. Submarines use ELF waves. They use extreme low frequency to communicate. So, and it's able to penetrate much deeper. Same thing, same kind of technology that they use, um, like with HARP, like and like they use to map out. It's the same frequency like that they use to map out for like oil and gas fields, and that they use the gas companies will use some have used in the past to look for big gas fields and stuff. Well, the Navy uses that same technology to communicate with submarines because they're so far down at the bottom of the ocean. Okay. Well, they can't use regular radio technology. It won't penetrate through the ocean water. Well, this submersible, right? They're going down 2 miles at least down to the bottom there. They don't have technology. They don't have access to the same technology in the civilian world that the Navy does. The military's not going to give up access to the same type of technology to the civilian world. So they have to rely on things like text messages, which would use a similar um, kind of technology where you wouldn't have to rely on uh, typical radio frequencies to be able to get messages down that far. So they're able to communicate with the submersible via text, and or via a text messaging type system, and that's how they communicate. So the ship on top of the ocean uses uses sonar and uses mapping systems that they already know. And when I say they, I mean the ships and uh, pretty much anybody that they've mapped, meaning the government and corporations have mapped the ocean floors already. They've known for a long time what is where, wreck sites, all sorts of stuff. They know what's all over the ocean floor. So they've created maps of what is where. They know what wrecks are where. They know that's how come they're able to find things much easier, like wreck sites and stuff, old wreck sites, like old World War II wreck sites. They're able to find things easier because satellites, they've they're able to map the ocean floor now as if the water wasn't there. Technology is pretty amazing. So
Yeah.
they're able to, they know a lot of this stuff. Like a lot of people, I was telling Radchick earlier, Steve, about how Ballard actually found the Titanic, the real story of how Ballard found the Titanic, where he was working for the Navy
Right.
secretly, and that he didn't just stumble upon the Titanic. They knew where the Titanic was. The deal was that he was allowed to, quote unquote, find the Titanic because he was actually working for the Navy to, finding it. I believe he was, if I remember correctly, he was looking for a Russian sub, and he was helping them find it, and that was missing. And he was in return for looking for that, he was he was allowed to, quote unquote, be the guy that found the Titanic. They already knew where everything was, through sonar technology, through mapping, through satellites. And that was years ago. Imagine what they know now with the technology and the satellites that they have up there now and the scans that they've done. So and there's more to the whole Ballard thing. That's just a quick overview of it, but the whole point is they know where everything is. Now, finding this thing right now is going to be hard because it's 2 miles down. They have no idea where it went off course. So you have to figure out, where it went off course. Did it go off course? What happened to it? They don't even know what happened to it. So they have to figure out what happened to it first. Did it go off course? There's no tether line to it. In previous trips down to the Titanic, like when Ballard was sending his ROVs and everything down, they were remotely controlled. They might have taken a submersible down, and then they went down to a certain depth, and then they sent out ROVs. with tether lines and stuff, and all of their stuff was still tethered. This thing wasn't tethered. There was no tether. It was like, hey, off you go. So there's no GPS device on it. There's no way to locate it really. They're using a version of text messages to go back and forth to each other to communicate with, on like low frequency through the water. It there's really there's a wide margin of error to be had. Now, I understand they may not want a tether line because if the sub gets, turned around or something, if they were getting close to the wreckage, they might not want to get caught up in the wreckage. But again, that leads back to then maybe you shouldn't be going down near the wreck site. It's a graveyard. Do people go out to Pearl Harbor and dive on the wreck sites at like the Arizona? No, you're not allowed to dive on the Arizona wreck site because it's a graveyard. It's sacred. You're not supposed to go there and dive on it. So why would, why do we just not have some sort of sacred reverence for the Titanic site and leave it alone? We've been down there. It's well over 100 years. Leave it alone. You scanned it. We've learned everything that we're going to learn about it. The more you mess with it, the more you're going to wreck that site. Why do we insist on going there and touching it? What are you going to do? What are you going to get close and touch it? Oh, we're billionaires. Can we have the ROV's arm reach out and take something, Steve? Can we take a boot? Can we take one of the passengers' boots as a souvenir? I mean, that's next. What are you going to start looting things from the crash site? Is that acceptable next? Maybe we'll,
Yeah, I
I
know
mean,
exactly. Yeah,
I get worked up over this. I was really pissed off this morning. I was like super actually pissed off this morning when I first saw this.
yeah. From what I understand, J.P. Morgan's gold-plated bathtub is still down there.
Or maybe he wants it back.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how thick the gold plating was on it, and it's going to be kind of a little hard to bring back up. But there's some value to the gold, I suppose, but maybe more value that it was J.P. Morgan's. An interesting comment from the French mariner Nargeolet, I think is the way his name is probably pronounced. French mariner Paul Henry Nargeolet feared to be among those missing in the Titanic tourist submersible gave an ominous statement to the Irish Examiner about deep sea explorations in 2019. He says, quoting him, "If you are 11 meters or 11 kilometers down, if something bad happens, the result is the same." Nargeolet told the outlet. He says, "When you're in very deep water, you're dead before you realize that something is happening. So it's just not a problem," is what he was saying, to the effect that something could happen so quickly at that depth that we may not even know what happened or have any report coming back until this submersible is now recovered, if ever. So,
Yes.
it may be down there.
That now you bring up a good point. So his quote is kind of prophetic because there's a on the sub itself, on the submersible, it had a device that would ping every 15 minutes and send a ping back to the ship and to let it know that everything was okay. It stopped pinging. That was how they know that there was no further communications. So, and there's been no communications at all, like no text messages back. They've sent communications via their text messaging system, and there hasn't been any communication back, and there's not even been a ping from this remote pinging system, which means that something catastrophic had to have happened. Now, it's also been over 24 hours, and there are multiple redundancies on this vessel when it comes to buoyancy and weights. So it's got different weight systems on it. And one of the weight systems, it's got fusible links that will automatically, after I believe 16 hours, start to melt. And because of the seawater, they start to dissolve, and it'll drop these, because it's got weighted bags underneath, and it'll automatically, these links after 16 hours will dissolve and drop the weights so that the submersible can start to float back up to the surface. And that's like a fail-safe in case everybody was passed out, say due to lack of oxygen or something inside of the sub itself. And the fact that that has not happened, and they have not seen the sub floating on the surface yet, it's been over 24 hours, that says something. So the question is the submersible down on the bottom and stuck in the wreckage? Because remember, they're kind of blind. It's pitch black. I mean, they have lights, but they're pitch black down there. It's pitch black down there, so they're kind of blind. So when they were going down, they were being guided by the ship above them. So while they were going down, could they have, and the experts here, and now again, they haven't found the wreckage yet, so they don't even know what happened. Everything is speculation at this point. So we're on what I like to refer to, and as my good friend, the late great Kev Baker, used to like to refer to, as Speculation Island. Okay, so we're hanging out on Speculation Island at this point, but because we don't know, but even the experts are hanging out on Speculation Island with us. So remember that, because nobody knows. But could it have gotten, meaning the sub, could the submersible have gotten hung up in the wreckage? So when they were coming down, if they're blind, Steve, and they don't know where they're at, it's pitch black, could they have gotten off course? Because remember, the ship above them is tracking them via sonar. So if now, and the ship above them, the Coast Guard hasn't released, they were asked, and I'm going to play this, they were asked if they think it hit the wreckage of the Titanic, and they were vague about the answer. They kind of avoided the answer. They haven't said that yet. But could they have, upon descent, crashed into the wreckage? And upon crashing into the wreckage, I mean, the ship is old, so it's been down there 110 years. So crashing into a 110-year-old ship, I mean, parts of the ship, people are like, people have stated over the years, oh, by now it would be like paper mache. Well, some of it would be like paper mache, but I'm willing to bet that some of that metal would still be pretty tough. And that little submersible, it doesn't matter. You only have to hit something hard enough to create a wee bit of pressure or a wee little leak. And with all the pressure on the outside of the hull, like that famed Titanic explorer had said earlier in that quote that you said, it would be over in an instant. It would be over before they even knew there was a problem. There's that much pressure that literally they would blink and it would be over. They'd get literally the time to say, oh shit, and it would be over.
Yeah.
And
That's
you'd
about
have
how fast.
explosive decompression and good night. That they wouldn't have time to send an SOS. There wouldn't be time for anything.
Right.
And that is a real possibility. And I think, and I'm not saying that to be doomy or to scare anybody. I'm saying that because honestly, the fact that all communication has disappeared and there's nothing. I mean, if if they were stuck down there, you'd think that they'd at least be able to text and say, "Hey, we're stuck, we're trapped, we're caught in the wreckage, something happened." You know, uh, estimates are they have enough oxygen until if they're just stuck for some reason, they have enough oxygen until Thursday. But if any type of situation happened where there was any type of breach, even the slightest, tiniest, teeniest, tiniest pinhole breach of that hull, which slamming into the wreckage of the ship itself would cause, I don't care how paper mache thin you think the decks of the ship are, it's still a large ship. There's still enough of it to make that tiny little submersible crack like a tin can, especially under the amount of pressure that's around it. You'd have an explosive decompression, and there literally wouldn't be time for somebody to even reach for a button that hit that, like the Mayday button. That there wouldn't be enough time. You wouldn't be able to get your finger across to hit it, even if it was a foot from you or 6 inches from you. That's how fast it happens. The amount of pressure coming in on you would be so great, everybody would be crushed inside instantly. I mean, instantaneously, in like a quarter of a second, it would be over. Nobody would feel anything. The plus side is it would happen so fast that nobody inside would suffer. So there's that.
Yes, an implosion of that scale would be very quick. And from what I understand, there are currents, believe it or not, down there. I don't know how violent they are, but yes, I mean it's not like the water is completely still at the bottom either. Things can move around, and there's a lot of pressure with that current. This isn't just like swimming against a river. This
Mm-hmm.
is like swimming against a brick wall. And so, the pressure at that depth could have possibly conflicted with their navigation, and this could have possibly caused that kind of an accident, Popeye. We don't
It
know
would
yet.
it would
Yeah.
crush everything in there, dude. It would turn that it would the force on the outside of that vessel, because remember it's pressurized. It's like an airplane, you know. So it's like you have to it's pressurized. Imagine the pressures on the outside of that vessel. I I can't explain that. I can't explain to people the amount of water pressure that's being exerted on every square inch of that hull. It's absolutely mind-boggling the amount of water pressure. I mean, you're 2 miles under the ocean.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's you're being they would be squeezed like a grape. Just take a grape, put it in your hand, okay, and squeeze it as hard as you can. That's what would happen to that vessel. It would you just compress it as hard as you can in your hand and squeeze. Just squeeze as hard as you can. That's what would happen to the vessel. It would
Yeah.
crush. It would just absolutely, and it would everything inside would be crushed. When you take a soda can and you compress the soda can on top of itself, you crush it all inside. What happens? You compress that soda can into a smaller, tiny little space, right? Everything is compressed down, tiny, just right, and you crush it up, right? What
Right.
happens?
Yeah.
It's still the same amount of mass. It's still the same amount of mass. That soda can is still you could, even if you had stuff inside the soda can. I mean, if you had liquid, it would, out into the surrounding area, and which in this case, stuff would kind of eject out into the sea. But the soda can itself is still technically the same amount of mass. It's just being compressed into a smaller space because you're putting pressure on it with your hands. Well, your hands are the sea, right? And that's what you're going to have. It's literally going to just squash everything like a grape. Uh, I mean, I'm not trying to be graphic or give anybody a horror movie esque type of uh,
Yeah, it's like hitting.
visual, but that's I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly I honestly I don't believe that we're gonna have uh I don't think we're gonna have a happy ending.
It doesn't look that way. There's no communication, which is one of the biggest problems here. There's no ping or any kind of recognizable signature that the ship, the submersible, is sending back. They don't really know where it is. It's presumed to be in the vicinity of the wreckage, but and it's like you said, though, Popeye, it's not just like squeezing a grape with your fingers. It's like hitting a grape with a sledgehammer. That's the kind of pressure you have down there at that depth, at 2.5 miles under the water. And, the system was designed to go that deep. It's done it before. It's made these deep dives, but these things can happen at that depth. And, it's really not, this is a very dangerous sport, if you like. It's not the kind of thing that anybody should take on as a fun outing. It's a very dangerous adventure. And the people on board were actually, a lot of them were very experienced oceanographers and people who had been involved in deep dives. It wasn't just a sightseeing thing. Some of these people had been, well, we have the whole list, I think, but several of them were specialists in some ways. So it wasn't just an outing. It was there were some of these people were well aware of what they were getting into, but at the same time, I don't think that this kind of sightseeing tour or whatever it is, the way it's being conducted by private enterprise to a large extent, and people have been trying to do this for quite some time. Robert Ballard was against the idea, simply because it is somewhat of a hallowed site, I guess is what you'd call it. It is a gray site. It is something that we don't want to disturb if we can. It's rusting away pretty fast down there. They say they don't know how long it's going to last because the iron is being eaten up quite a bit by the very deep plankton and algae and all the corruption and corrosion down there. But at the same time, it's just not something that we really should be playing around with and looking at as a tour guide would go through here. I know it's interesting, but it is really nothing more than just a wreck on the bottom of a very dark ocean. And we could talk about how it got there, a few things, and and I have talked about what really happened on the Titanic. What I was going to suggest, Popeye, is this: the reason why people are interested in the Titanic, I believe, is because there's a mystery to it all. There's a ghost story about it. It's one of those sites, and there've been much bigger wrecks, of course. The Lusitania, other ships. The Titanic wasn't the largest uh, disaster at sea. It was, I think, number third or fourth on the list, something like that. But there are people who are still asking questions about it after all these years, and that's one of the reasons why people are still interested in this whole story. I believe people have a tendency to be very interested in things that have a spiritual or almost a haunting about them, and I think the Titanic is one of them. What do you think, Popeye?
Well, I I think people are attracted to it because of the mystery. I think they're attracted to it because of the whole story, and, I mean, it's kind of a romantic story, it's a luxury liner, uh, the story, if you watch the James Cameron movie, you have the dramatic part, with Jack and Rose, but I mean, the whole thing where you see the luxury and the grand staircase and just the overall ambiance of the whole ship and the beauty. So people are it's definitely uh, there's an air of mystery to it, even if you don't look into the side of it that you and I have over the years with why they might have, sunk it
Right.
on purpose. So I think people I mean, I was attracted to it just because I was a big, um, disaster nerd when I was a kid. So and shipwreck nerd. So I was just attracted to it on that level. But, yeah, I think people are attracted to it for a multitude of reasons. I mean, It's the Titanic. It's like the shipwreck of shipwrecks. So of course billionaires are gonna, I have to go down and see it. If I'm gonna see a shipwreck, it's gotta be the Titanic. You know, there were the rich people of the day were on it.
Mhm.
J.P. Morgan, owned it. He owned the White Star Line. I have to go see that ship.
Right.
You know, the who's who of the day sailed on it.
Yeah.
So, I think people are just attracted uh, uh, to go there. I just don't. I think it's disrespectful. I don't think people should be diving on it. It used to be a thing where it was. I remember when they first found it. It was like, oh my God, they'd be even sending submersibles down to the Titanic? Is it disrespectful to even take video footage of it? Now it's, hey, let's let rich billionaires take joyrides down in a and take pictures of it and have coffee. It's fine. I don't think it's a good idea. This is a really big reason. I'm sure now they're probably not, after this, they probably won't let people take joyrides down to go see the shipwreck anymore. But what happens if it did crash into the shipwreck? Then what are they going to do? Well, we have to
Right.
retrieve the submersible and get their bodies out. So what are you going to do? Wreck the 110-year-old shipwreck and the gravesite that nobody. I remember they didn't want to take anything up. They were originally going to try to raise it, and then they said, no, we can't raise the Titanic because we wouldn't want to destroy anything. We wouldn't want the ship to come apart. We wouldn't want to wreck anything. Besides, it's a grave site, so no. But now you're gonna, if the thing is crash in there, what are you gonna do? You're gonna have to wreck the grave site to pull it out, to pull the submersible out, all because rich people wanted to go have their fun. So
Mhm. Yeah.
I think something happened. I think either the sub crashed into the wreck site and there was an implosion of some sort, or on the way down they had a hull breach and there was an implosion. It was one of the two. And yes, one of the chatters brought up earlier when I said explosive decompression. That's my accident brain. They said, "Oh, Popeye, it's not an explosion; it's an implosion." And yes, you were correct. That was my accident brain. I used the wrong terminology. So you are correct. It would be an implosion because the force would be going inward because it would be pushing inward and be crushing it. It's not like an airplane where it would be exploding outward. You're correct. But and I that's my you know accident brain. I used the wrong terminology at first. But so I wanted to give the chatter their due since they're probably watching live still. So yes, you were correct. Uh, the I think that there was some sort of
Mhm.
accident where you're gonna hear in the next day or two. All the coverage I've seen of this, no one wanted to say that. Everyone's like, "Oh, we're hopeful we're gonna find it," and they're probably just lost, and they have like all this time of oxygen left until, and I hope they find them. But I think everybody is just trying to avoid the. I think everyone's just trying to avoid the obvious here, and I mean, somebody I heard I heard somebody say earlier today, could it have been a sea monster? Could it have been a sea monster that attacked it? I mean, it could. I mean, are we getting into the MH370 realm already? I mean, I think we should avoid that whole side of things until we've run out of possibilities. I think honestly, it's just a matter of let's use Occam's razor. It's one of two things at this point in time, which would be the simplest answer would be either on the way down there was a hull breach, or they actually hit the wreck site and which caused the hull breach. So I,
Yeah.
I honest I honestly think it's one of those two scenarios.
A number
Um,
of things could have happened, of course. Yeah, like we said before, it's almost over instantly if something really goes serious. In most cases, almost all diving equipment like this has its own detachable ballast that they can, if they are in serious trouble, they can release weight and usually the submersible will start it on its way back up. Now it can come up very fast, sometimes too fast as well. But generally speaking, it should be able to just drop its weight and come right back up, and nothing has happened in all these hours so far. So that's not a good sign in my thinking.
Yeah, so that's why. So when I heard that it had these redundancies on it, like with the ballast and everything, where they had, so it's got like ballast plates that it can drop, right?
Right.
It's got
Yeah.
roll weights, which if for some reason they can't drop, they lose power or something, and they can't drop the they can't drop the weights, they can't drop the ballast plates or whatever. Okay, we don't have electric, we can't drop them. Well, they've got roll weights which are attached by like they're hanging on like bars that hang off the sides. And what happens is the people inside the sub move to one side and then the other side, and they cause the sub to roll back and forth, and it would cause the ballasts, the weights on these poles to then, the sub shifts, rolls to one side, and they slide off, and then people move to the other side of the sub, and it would cause the sub to roll, and then they roll off the other side, and then it would allow the sub to ascend.
Yeah.
Well, okay, what if the people are knocked out because lack of oxygen or something? Okay, well, they thought of that too. So that was the whole, on the bottom of it, there's bags filled with ballast where they have these fusible links where after like 16 hours in the seawater, they, they melt, they dissolve, and then the bags drop and it ascends. Well, I mean, none of this has happened. There hasn't been any radio communications. And like I said, there was a device that was not man controlled, it was automated. And every 15 minutes, it would send a ping back to the ship. That stopped when they lost communication with the ship an hour and 45 minutes into the dive. The fact that none of these backup ballast systems have activated or, kicked in after 16 hours, and that automated ping system stopped when they lost communication. See, when I heard that, my first thought was, uh-oh, something compromised in the hull, and boom.
Yeah.
An
Sounds
hour and an hour and
yeah.
45 minutes into the dive, Steve, they would have been down. They would have been almost down to the bottom. They're down in pressure town. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's not a place at all where you can survive under a very or slightly compromised situation. Even something goes wrong there, is like you said. It's over before you even know it.
Yeah.
And
One of the chatters, Sam Oliver in the chat, says sub was compromised and sank. I agree. I honestly think I agree, Sam. I honestly think that is what we're going to come to find out. I wholeheartedly think, as sad as that is, I think that's what we're gonna come to find out is it was compromised in one way or another. Like I said, whether it was just a hull breach or it hit the wreckage, and that's what we're gonna come to find out.
yeah, that's the way I think it is going to turn out as well, because they probably would have had some report. It wouldn't take all that long to surface, really, if they even went through some form of an emergency uh, protocol, and they had to do that. 2.5, 3 hours, possibly at the max, would have been about the amount of time it would have taken to emerge, and there was no communications. So this doesn't look good. I don't know how they might possibly find anyone still down there, but I don't know how they're going to bring them up. To be honest with you, even if they find them, they can send down submersibles. They can look around. I don't know how far from the vicinity of the wreckage they may be. I would assume they're pretty close to it, but you're going to have to find them first. Even if and they're running out of air, probably less than 60 hours left. That's a lot of air for 5 people, inside of a tin can. Really, they must have a lot of oxygen on tap. But the thing is, without any communications or any power, I don't know what the story is and why they are not communicating at all. You would think they would have at least 2 or 3 redundant communication capabilities in this submersible, and I don't think anybody's heard anything from them, and that's not a good sign.
No, it's not a good sign at all. It's I honestly don't think it's going to end up in a happy ending. And I'm not saying that again because I'm trying to be doomy. I'm not trying to be uh I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be, I'm not I'm not trying to get money off this. I'm not making super chats or anything. My YouTube channel's not monetized, so it's not like you can throw me super chats if you wanted to. Uh I'm being honest. I'm being straight up honest. As soon as I saw that there was a sub missing, I was like, "Oh no." But first I was like I said, I'll be straight up honest. I was kind of pissed off that they went down there and they were, and then, when I thought about it, and then okay, it was probably it was probably lost on the way down. And then when I heard them talking about, well, maybe they hit the wreckage, I was like, "Oh God, wow! I hope they didn't crash into the wreckage." And I'll be honest with you, my first thought wasn't, "I hope they didn't crash into the wreckage," because it wasn't like, "Oh, I hope they didn't crash into the wreckage because of those poor people on the sub." That wasn't my. It was, "I hope they didn't crash into the wreckage and disturb the gravesite." That was honestly my first thought. Because, I
Yeah.
mean, with the sub missing, I figured, well, the sub's probably lost, right? I was honestly hoping that it wasn't a scenario where the sub crashed into, like, the sub's probably lost. Let's hope they at least didn't wreck the gravesite as well.
Yeah.
And that may sound horrible to some people, and some people are going to be like, God, Popeye, that's horrible. Well, I'm sorry, but I think it's really disrespectful that they're down here, they're going down in, tourism at a gravesite. I just it's tacky. Sorry, it's super tacky and disrespectful.
Yeah, it's going to throw a wet blanket on people who've been wanting to go down there as one of these exploratory adventures. If this comes back the way it does, we've looked at this for so many years, and there's still so many questions about it. Popeye and I have raised questions about what really happened. There are a lot of mysteries about the Titanic. There's really no way that I can sum it up except to say that it was just a cataclysmic series of several major events that sunk the ship. There was a lot of reasons why the Titanic should have never been near that ice flow, and I call it an ice flow because people seem to think it was just one lone iceberg out there, but no, they were headed into a brick wall of ice that was ahead of them, and these things happen during warmer springs. There was a book written by a fellow by the name of Robinson, I think it was Morgan Robinson, who had written the book "The Wreck of the Titan," ominously back in I think it was 1898 or something like that. And he talked about this Popeye quite a bit, and they knew that these ice flows would happen in warmer springs. The ice would come off the coast of Newfoundland and form these big tongues of just ice jammed water that would stretch 200 to 300 miles. And before the Titanic even left, they already had the problem there that they were knowing there was something that could happen. Something could have taken place, and they could have run into that big ice. It was like a brick wall of ice, friends. The Californian was there, according to Lightoller, the second mate who survived, or the second in command, their second officer, who survived the wreck, and he said that ice flow was there. They knew it was there. They had received several warnings, and there's a lot of questions as to why they didn't respond to the many warnings about the ice there. I heard one person who calculated the distance it would have taken to turn the Titanic to the south and get below 40 degrees latitude, and it would have only extended the voyage by about 90 minutes, you know. And of course, it wasn't about a speed record, because the bottom line is the speed records are set over the space of a distance, not the space of port to port. So, and it wasn't about a speed record. As everybody knows, there were only 6 of the boilers that were lit, and they were doing very well, 22, 23 knots, which was very fast. That's about 26 miles an hour. Going through, imagine a skyscraper going through the water at about 26, 27 miles an hour. That's how fast the Titanic was moving, and the water was just as clear as glass and as flat as glass. They weren't up against any headwind or anything like that, but they were definitely headed into a very dangerous situation that everybody knew about. So you look at this whole thing from the beginning, and you wonder about how people can, even the Titanic itself was one of those trips that people took for granted their ability to handle the situation, and the navigation on the ship was just absolutely reckless and dangerous. I've often said, Popeye, if a pilot was flying a new plane, a brand new jet airplane from Paris to New York or something like that, and had a lot of dignitaries on board, and he got notice that there was a volcanic eruption in Iceland, and there was all this pumice up at 36, 40,000 feet in his path. Do you think he would want to fly that brand new jet airplane right into that volcanic ash and chew up the engines and plummet it into the sea? I don't think so. Well, there were plenty of warnings even before Titanic left about this ice flow. It was this big, huge flow of jammed field ice and big bergs before they left. And why the Titanic was even close to this area is a question. Once again, you have people, and you have to wonder why things like this can happen, right?
Ray Finkel in the chat said, "Did the billionaire have information that would have led to the arrest of Hillary Clinton?"
Yeah.
Good question. Perhaps. Perhaps. So the interestingly enough, Steve, the newest scans that they came out with of the Titanic, the 3D rendering I told you about earlier today, I know you didn't even know this. They had scanned the Titanic recently, and they did like 3D rendering of it. And you can go now up on YouTube, and you can watch like a tour, a virtual tour of the Titanic wreck site, of both pieces, and the debris that's strewn in between the two pieces. And after scanning, after doing the scans of the wreck site and uploading them and rendering this 3D model of the whole wreck site, and this only came out just recently. This came out. They said that the official story. Now hold on to your seats, ladies and gentlemen. They said the official story, the official version of events of how the Titanic hit the iceberg and sunk, could not have happened the way they said it did. Because from what they saw and the damage that they could see, that it did not hit an iceberg along its side and open up a big gash and sink, and that what they saw appeared to be, from what they could see, that there actually appeared to be damage and a hole along, from what they could tell, underneath, along the bottom of the ship. Well, gee, that's kind of strange,
Right.
Steve.
Yeah, it sure is.
Gee, that's kind of strange. That's kind of sounds similar to what you and I said years ago from our investigations and the evidence that you and I had looked through. And people have asked me, well, what books did you read? I've been interviewed before and over the years, and I've been asked, well, whose books did you read? What books would you recommend the listeners go read? I didn't read anybody's books on the Titanic. I know there's been a couple authors in the past few years that have written books about the Titanic. And there's people that have, written books. There's probably like 3 or 4 books that have been written about the Titanic, and a couple different authors here or there that have written books about the Titanic over the course of time. But I didn't read any of those books, and neither did Steve for our purposes of investigation into the wreck of the Titanic. There was an old actual BBC documentary from probably like 15, maybe 20 years ago about the wreck of the Titanic, or the sinking of the Titanic, that I watched, and that I had used as a little bit of research, because they brought up some of the old stories, and they actually dived into the original, we'll say, the original talks of conspiracy. I don't think a lot of people realize this, but when the Titanic first sunk, the idea of conspiracy goes back to when the ship first sunk. This doesn't go back to 10 or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and me talking about it, or Steve talking about it. I got into this because I had somebody reach out to me, and I had somebody say to me, somebody reached out to me when I was discussing 9/11, and I was doing my research on 9/11 and stuff, and I was putting out, I was writing articles about the Kennedy assassination and 9/11, and doing videos about both. I wasn't even doing a radio show yet. I wasn't uh, I wasn't doing radio. And I had just started doing. I was doing. I've been putting together YouTube videos for a while, and doing like short documentaries, putting them together up on YouTube and on Google Video. And I just got into doing radio, and I wasn't even doing radio yet, and I was doing my documentaries, and somebody had reached out to me about the Titanic disaster, and then within a few short months, I started doing radio, and then eventually, within the first couple months of doing radio, one of my first big broadcasts was on the Titanic. But before I was even doing radio, I had somebody reach out to me and say, "You should look into the Titanic. There's some weird stuff with it." And that's all they said. And they said, "You might find it interesting. I've seen some weird things around it, but I haven't really had a chance to look into it. You might be able to uncover more." Okay. And I was like, "The Titanic? The Titanic?" And at the time, you have to understand, I get so much, especially when I was doing federaljack.com all the time. I used to get so many tips on so many stories. I used to I would you'd hear so much crazy stuff, you would be like, "Okay, really?" So when somebody was like, "The Titanic," I was like, I've been researching the sinking of the Titanic for a very long time, since I was a kid. What do you mean that? Come on, not everything is a conspiracy." And remember, I'm skeptical about stuff. I don't just dive into the conspiracy pool. I know a lot of people are like, "Well, you're the conspiracy guy, Popeye." Right, but I don't dive into the deep end of the conspiracy pool head first. I I try to look at things with a skeptical mindset, so that way I don't get taken just by any little thing, right?
Right.
So I was like, "All right, let me look into this." So I
Yeah.
started looking into it, and the deeper I looked into the Titanic, the more I was like, "Oh, wow, this is kinda hinky." You start to realize, well, JP Morgan owned the White Star Line. You start to read the original reports. Like I said, there were no books written back when I started researching this. There was nobody people I should have written a book, because people told me years ago, "Oh, Popeye, you should write a book." Now there's like 3 or 4 books written on it, but, you know, back when Steve and I first did our first show, there were no books written about it, except for Morgan Robertson's book, The Futility of the Titan, or Futility Wreck of the Titan is what it was called.
Yeah.
So I had seen this BBC documentary about the Titanic, and I see in the documentary they mentioned a guy named Paddy the Pig, and Paddy was one of the firemen on the boat on the Titanic, and the firemen were the guys that shoveled the coal into the boilers, and Paddy had swore up and down that the Titanic was the Olympic, and him and other firemen that were on board didn't want to when the Titanic set sail, they didn't want to when it made one last port call before it set off into history. And Paddy got off the ship, and a bunch of other firemen got off the ship, and they didn't want to sail with it. Now these guys, you understand, these guys are like blue collar workers. They need money. For these guys to not want to work, that makes no sense. And a lot of these guys were like, that ain't the Titanic, that's the Olympic. Its sister ship, which was involved in a major accident with the HMS Hawk. And the keel was bent on the ship. And the ship was not seaworthy. And long story short, they swapped the names out, the White Star Line. That way they could sail the thing, get insurance on it and sail it, and then sink it, insurance fraud. Well, the firemen and the people, the workers on that ship knew what the deal was. They knew that wasn't the Titanic. They knew it was the Olympic. And you can't fool the guys that have been working on that ship. They know what the deal was. And a lot of the firemen didn't want to set sail. And after the Titanic sank, there was talk of switching the ship. I mean, this all goes back to the original, inquiry. You can read and I saw this in this documentary, and I was like, oh, so I had to go find things on microfiche. I had to go look things up at the library. I actually had to go to the local library. I was living in South Beach at the time, and I had to go to the library in Miami Beach, and I had to try to find records and news articles, and it was all microfiche. They still had the microfiche files back then, because this is early 2000s or mid 2000s. It's like 2007. So I had to find all the stuff. They still had microfiche files back then, and I found all of that stuff. And I was able to find some of these old files. I found a lot. Then I was able to find stuff online. And I was able to read a lot of these articles, and some of these old newspaper articles, from 100 years before, 90 years before at the time. And a lot of these stories were in there. A lot of these accounts were in there of these guys, these firemen and other workers on the ship that were like, no, I don't want to, I don't want to get on the ship. Or other people, other scuttlebutt of people that had been on the ships that had said, no, that, they switched the ships. So this idea that there was a conspiracy, even if it wasn't, they're trying to kill people, meaning the rich elites that JP Morgan had purposely invited on the ship, and that they had steered it into this ice field. There was a lot more to it. But at the very base, even if you don't want to think any of the other stuff, what about insurance fraud? Because there's plenty of evidence to show that they were trying to, at the very least, commit insurance fraud. So there's that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hinkiness around the Titanic itself. There's a lot of weirdness. So I'm superstitious as a sailor as it is, right? So understanding all of that, having this understanding with all that superstition, now you're going to go out and you're going to start a tourism industry for the elites to drop in submersibles to go look at this thing. No, bad idea. You're tempting fate. That area should be left alone. It's sacred. I don't think you should be diving anywhere near it. A lot of the wreck sites from World War II, they don't dive on. Some of them are in shallower waters. You may get divers that go out and pleasure dive on some of these old sites. I don't agree with that either. I think they should be left alone. They're grave sites. There's places that they don't dive on. There's wreck sites that they don't dive on because people have reverence and respect for them. Well, maybe we should do that with all of these old wrecks. Leave them alone. There are people trapped. Well, I mean, by now, obviously, their bodies have been, withered away by the sea and by whatever sea life has gone in and out of the ship. But, technically, it's a grave site. Just leave it alone. The spirits of the dead are down there. Davy Jones's locker and all of that. You don't mess with that. As an old sailor, you don't mess with that.
Yeah.
You just don't mess with that. I'm superstitious as hell when it comes to that. You don't mess with that. You wouldn't catch me in a submersible going down anywhere near that. I don't care. Popeye, you and Steve are invited to go on a submersible to go actually see the wreck of the Titanic. No thanks.
Yeah.
No thanks. I'll view it from my tablet on YouTube. That's cool. You can
Right.
keep that opportunity to yourself. No, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. We've seen so many pictures and films. There have been so many expeditions right now. There's not much more except what we've talked about before, Popeye. And I could probably show you the pictures here. I've got the National Geographic 100-year edition. If you look at the wreckage on the field of where it lies, you'll see the bow pointing, I think, to the northeast if the direction of the map and that's the way it's placed in the magazine are correct. And about 3/4 of a mile away, you will find two plates that were from the bottom of the hull. And the pictures of these plates they're both virtually square. They were about 92 feet across the midship of the hull, and they went right through the keel. So there were actually three cuts, if you like. Well, let's put it this way: they tore away on the sides of the hull. But you see that they range about 26 feet in ship's length, and they're lying about 3/4 of a mile from the rest of the wreckage. James Cameron has admitted that they came apart at the surface. They fluttered away. He has a kind of a butterfly illustration. I don't think he flapped like a butterfly. But apparently, and I've seen reconstructions of the Titanic, as Popeye and I have both said, there was a major eruption that blew the bottom out of the ship at the surface. And that's been pretty well concluded by everybody. For a long time, James Cameron said that he believed that the weight of the lower end or the bow sinking caused the ship to break in half. There's even some theories that say that if the Titanic had not broken up in half, or there had been an explosion just about right before between the third and fourth funnel. If that had not happened, the Titanic could have remained afloat. It's a little bit like if you take a big long board, like a 2x6 or something like that, and you put a lot of weight on the back of it, which is where a lot of the weight is on ships like this. The bow is a little lighter. Most of the big machinery, the gears, the props, and everything like that. Well, if you push the bow, the front end of that board down, and you got weight on it, the more you push that stuff that's heavy up out of the water, the more buoyantly it wants to shift back. So the problem could have been that the weight of the back of the Titanic could have been holding up the ship and the bow from sinking faster than a lot of people expected. Cameron said that he believed that the incline was at 29 degrees, and his engineers who looked at the buoyancy factors said no, 19. Now that's enough to raise the screws or the props up out of the water, like people said they saw it before it broke in half, by the way. But it's not the big picture that we were told, that the whole back end of the Titanic was up out of the water at such an angle that it was going to snap in half. It looks more like what had happened actually was that something took place and blew out the bottom of the ship, and you find the two plates, the two keel plates, as Popeye pointed out in that production we did a long time ago, Popeye, that those two keel plates are lying 3/4 of a mile from the rest of the wreckage. And you can see them off to the corner of the page if you look at the whole wreckage field there. They are basically square, which is very strange. I mean, you would think they would be kind of ragged and torn, like you'd maybe uh, blown a tin can open with a shotgun or something like that. But they look like they're squarely cut, which is very strange. The only thing I'm interested in that area right there is to look at those plates, which are quite a distance from the rest of the wreckage, and see if there are any telltale signs of explosion or anything that would have possibly severed those two pieces out. They look like they were cut out with a knife. That's how right across the keel, as you pointed out many years ago, Popeye, on the shows that we did. I mean, they went right through the keel. They're straight cut. One place it looks like they tore a little bit, and they say, well, the keel basically tried to hold on, and you can see where the metal kind of expanded and bent out, and that is possible in one location, but in other places the keel is squarely cut right across the middle. So the question is, how did those two plates get blown out of the bottom of the ship? And for many years, the passengers had said that yes, there was an underwater explosion that took place, and that's when the ship broke up. The British inquiry said no, the ship went down in one piece. The American inquiry said, do we think it broke apart in two pieces? And now, obviously, you can see from the wreckage, there's two major pieces. The bow still pointing in one direction upright, and then kind of corkscrew descent of the stern as it twisted and turned and fell down about maybe 1/4 of a mile from the rest of the wreckage of the bow. So
They're
we see that.
never correct, Steve, by the
Yeah,
way. I just
yeah,
want to point out that they're never correct. They they weren't correct about the Edmund Fitzgerald either.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, one sailor was blamed for not closing the hatch, and even named Gordon Lightfoot's song. And Gordon Lightfoot went back and changed the lyrics to his song when he realized that sailor had shut that hatch. They thought that maybe that hatch that he had left open was the reason why it flooded and broke apart. But in fact, that hatch was found closed. Just the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald is a good example, right, Popeye?
Yes, they're routinely wrong. I mean, they swore to God the Titanic went down in one piece, and then oops, the Titanic didn't go down in one piece. Uh, You know, there were survivors that said it broke in half. No, it could not have broken in half. That ship would never break in half.
Hmm. Right.
Dur During the inquiry into the sinking, that was that was hushed up. The ship did not break in half, and then when they looked down at the wreckage, oh, what did Ballard find?
Yes. Two
Oh,
pieces, two big ones. Yeah.
two separate, distinct pieces,
Mhm. Yeah, they
actually
sure did.
pretty far apart,
Mhm.
which would lead one to understand what, Steve?
Right.
That they broke apart on the surface
That's right.
of the
Mhm.
water.
That's
Hmm,
right.
hmm.
Yes, that's what's concluded by everybody now. I think James Cameron actually knows what really happened. In his article, he says what we have here is a crime scene. We assume that he's speaking metaphorically, but maybe he isn't. He says what we have here is a crime scene. We have the knife over here and the gun over there. Now, wait a minute. What's he talking about? The knife that slit the bow let the water leak in. Of course, you know the whole story. The seams broke there, and the water came in. And then we have the gun, which blew the backbone out of it over there. And I don't know whether he is being, he's kind of a mysterious person. He's one hell of an Argonaut. You got to admit. I think he holds the record for the deepest dive out there. He's one of those people that has been down to the Marianas Trench, the bottom of that holds the record of the deepest dive.
Honestly, if there's 2 people that I would say that they should actually try to reach out to, and it would be him and Ballard, but Ballard's passed away.
Yeah, there's so many secrets involved in this even to this day. And as I said, there's a
Pretty sure
cataclysmic.
Ballard's passed away. I have to actually
I can't think he might have just recently. I can't remember.
Robert Ballard.
But yeah, we'll have to look that up. But there's so many secrets involved. It
Pretty
seems like
sure.
in all of
I'm
this.
pretty sure he's. I'm pretty sure. I think he passed away. Maybe he might still be alive.
Yeah.
Let me see. Oh
Yeah.
no,
Just
he's still alive.
yeah. I think you're right. I thought he might have died
I
recently, but
thought
I
he
think it's.
died recently, but no, I think he's still actually alive. Let's see. It says
Mhm,
he's still alive. He's
mhm.
80. Well, get Ballard on the horn. And he's,
Yeah.
he is retired Navy anyway. So like, that's why he was willing to work with Oni back in the day. But let's see.
With a lot of these things, though, Popeye, what I
Yeah,
would
he's
say.
80 years old. He's still alive.
Mhm.
I thought he, why did I think he, I see, maybe this is why I think sometimes like I live, like the timelines actually do switch. This is a whole different topic, but sometimes it's like that whole multiverse thing. I'm not talking about that whole Mandela effect, but sometimes I am a firm believer in the multiverse thing because sometimes it's like I could swear to God I was in a universe at one point where Robert Ballard was passed away like 5 years ago,
Mhm,
but according to this, he's still alive. He's 80 years old.
mhm. Yeah,
So
he's still around.
yeah, that's cool. Well, good for Robert Ballard. He's a year younger than my father, so good for him.
Mhm. But
But if he's still around, they need to get him and James Cameron on the horn, and because those two guys have the most time, literally down by by the Titanic, by that
yeah,
shipwreck,
yeah,
out of
Cameron.
anybody on the planet,
Mhm,
Robert Ballard and James Cameron.
yeah. Cameron has spent more time on the Titanic than Edward J. Smith did.
Yeah,
It's true, it's true. He ac
seriously.
No, that is true, underwater. He actually has spent more time on the deck of the Titanic than Captain Smith had, and so, under 12,500 feet. But yeah, there's a lot there. And of course, Ballard, as you mentioned in the beginning of the show, was actually looking for the Titanic, but his job was to be doing submarine observations and exploration. He got the Navy grants to do that and stumbled upon finding the Titanic in a
Yeah,
different location than where it was. Because remember, the sighting of where Lightoller had mentioned that the Titanic sunk was really, I think, 13 and a half miles off from where it actually went down. So it took a while before they actually knew the location. And it was, as I understand, it was a good thing that Lighttoller's sightings or his star navigation was off slightly, because had they gone to the location of where the Titanic actually sunk, the Carpathia might have completely missed the survivors. So a stroke of luck there that the Carpathia uh, came across them looking in the wrong location and was able to rescue a lot of those people, because remember, they're out at sea in very cold conditions and a lot of them are very wet. Many of them were suffering from serious exposure. Some didn't even make it. But there are a lot of things that happened there during all of that, and we know
yeah, but
that.
it's interesting that the whole story was like, oh, Ballard was out looking for the Titanic. Yeah, no, he
Mhm.
wasn't.
No, yeah, he was actually working under a naval grant, but he
Yeah,
had kind of an idea that he might find it too, so it was a little bit of
I
a
think
bonus. Yeah. Mhm.
I think that they really need, if they want to. I mean, they should put. They probably did call Ballard up.
Oh yeah.
Maybe
Mhm.
I'm sure his phone rang. Maybe Cameron's phone rang, and he. I mean, he, James Cameron, as much as he is a filmmaker, that guy knows a lot about submersibles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, again, he's been to the very bottom of the Marianas Trench. He holds the record. There are two other
Yep.
divers that have been that deep. As far as I know, there may be a deeper dive by this time, but a couple of years ago,
He
these three had the record,
I'm pretty
36
sure
something.
he's probably
Yeah.
told them the same thing, that the same conclusion that we've all come to.
Yeah. Probably.
I mean,
Very likely about the
from what
submersible. Yeah.
I
Mhm,
think the CEO of the company
mhm.
is in the submersible too,
Well,
from what
what's
I
his name?
understand.
Hamish Harding. Hamish Harding. The
Yeah, that
UK billionaire, I think, is a fellow Voyager. I think he's one of the people that was on board as well.
yeah,
So,
he's a UK, but yeah, there's a billionaire on there.
mhm,
There's the Titanic expert. Of course, they'd have that guy on there, right?
right.
So so he could give like a tour. This is almost like a bad movie, like the script. It almost reads like the cast of a disaster film. The billionaire, the Titanic expert, the the CEO of the company. From what I understand, I saw, and I don't know if this is true or not. I mean, because they're not really they and that's why I want to watch the press release from the Coast Guard too. I'm going to play it because I know they've said one person. They've released a couple people who are on there, but I want to see if they're saying that this is true or not because I haven't seen I haven't seen conclusive confirmation yet. But I saw a report earlier today that said the CEO of the company who owns the submersible was on board the submersible.
Yeah, it's this is quite a disaster for some of these people. That's for sure. You know.
I mean, look, I feel bad for anybody. Human life is human life, and I feel bad for them, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it loss of. I feel bad for the people's families. I feel bad for their children, their loved ones, because I understand what it's like to lose someone, and that pain is terrible. And as catty as we could be and say, "Oh, screw them, they're elites." Look, their families are human, and I can tell you, as a widower, it tears your heart out to lose your partner. So I don't want to be catty and just be a douche and be like, "Oh, screw them." I used to be like that. Okay, I used to be like that a long time ago, and there are people that are evil. Um, and if they're evil POSs, then yeah, sure. If they were like the David Rockefellers, or but I don't know that any of these people on board were like that. Just because they're billionaires doesn't make them evil. Not all billionaires are, and elites are on board with the New World Order agenda, right? I can't be unrealistic and just throw everybody into that group.
Right.
That's just as bad as the commies or any of the other groups that lump everybody together into groups just because of oh, we have to get rid of the billionaires because they're billionaires. No, I'm not like that.
Yeah, they have
So
different opinions too, as you can tell. You
yes,
know, I
I
mean,
mean, no,
right?
they do, and I'm just
Yeah,
being human. I'm being realistic with all you people. Look,
yeah,
uh, I, I lost my wife, and that changed me fundamentally as a human being. So I can understand the pain of losing a partner. So I wouldn't wish that on the wives or the children of these people. Okay.
yeah.
It was their dumb decision, the people that went down in the thing.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't wish that pain and suffering on their kids or their wives or whoever, their significant others, whatever the deal is. Like I'm not going to put that kind of negative energy out there because I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that to come back on me again either. I know what it felt like. Okay, and if you don't know, I can't describe it to you,
Right.
other than it feels like having your heart carved out of your chest while it's still beating. It's the
Yeah,
shittiest, most ugliest, most painful feeling you could ever experience. So
yeah. It's tough. It
I
really
wouldn't.
is.
I'm not gonna wish that on anybody. But I do think it was. I mean, it's a Darwin Award thing to go down 2 miles in a tin can. Um, I think it's disrespectful to go down. I don't think they should be going down, and I'm angry about the whole situation. But I'm not going to wish that kind of negative on anybody. That's me personally, and that's why. I'm
Right.
I'm not I'm not going to sit here and preach to y'all, but that's why I'm not going to do it because I understand the other end of the feeling on that. So
But how would you feel though, Popeye, if we had an expedition? We launched one to send submersibles, not a manned submersibles, but drone submersibles to go down examined those plates and cut some segments off of them. Remember, these are 3/4 of a mile away from the rest of the wreckage, and they're just double bottom pieces of the hull, is all they are.
They could
Bring them,
have.
yeah,
They could have.
bring them up.
They could
Mhm.
have. I mean, they could have. They don't know. Remember, they're blind, so they could have been. They could have like as they were coming down blind, they could have been away from the bigger pieces of the hull, but they could have careened down into a smaller piece. And
Sure.
again, all it takes, Steve, is one small piece to
Yeah,
puncture the side of that thing. I mean, it's a small little it's not like a regular submarine. It's a small little cramped tiny cramped little vessel. You only need again, going back to the amount of force that's being applied per square inch, it's absolutely like mind bending the amount of pressure per square inch that's being applied. You have one small problem, you have a pinhole. You're screwed. You're screwed. I mean, the tiniest little pinhole forms and you're done. And it as the guy said, it'll happen so fast. You won't, like I said, you wouldn't get the words "oh shit" out of your mouth. You wouldn't even get the sentence finished and it would be over. Everybody inside would be goo.
mhm,
You'll be jello and it's
yeah,
over like that. You'll literally the inside of the sub will be outside. And that's why I honestly think something like that happened. You know, whether it was I think the applying Occam's razor, there was either a, a, a compromise to the hull, whether it be a pinhole leak or something, or they hit the wreckage, and
yeah,
then the hull was compromised, and boof, it's over. And they wouldn't they wouldn't really there'd be no time to send an SOS, nothing. That's why there wasn't an SOS. There wasn't a text message. There wasn't anything. There was loss of the ping, everything.
yeah.
No buoyancy, no none of that. No, there's nothing to float up. That would that would explain everything. There's why has nothing floated to the surface? Because there's nothing to float.
Yeah.
At that depth, it would have been crushed, and then whatever is left would just kind of sink to the bottom.
Yeah, it's actually kind of astounding that there haven't been any major accidents after all this time. Remember, the Titanic was discovered in '85. We're
Right.
almost 40 years ago. And of
You'd
course, a
think
lot of
all
people
the
have been
trips
down.
down there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
No,
Yeah,
that's actually a very valid point. So, I mean, I guess they could use that to say some lawyer is probably going to use that, Steve, actually, to make the case that how safe diving
yeah,
on the wreck site actually is.
yeah.
You watch.
It's like people fly all the time in planes, and there's a plane crash, and they say, "Yeah,
Yes.
but most of the people fly, and it's fine."
They'll
I mean,
say it's safer to dive on the wreck site than it is to drive a car
right?
or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah. But again, I still think where you and I've been going for all this time is looking at the wreck and the forensics themselves of what happened. I would estimate there are at least 9 reasons why, maybe 10 reasons, Popeye, why everything that happened in the Titanic really was out of the ordinary in terms of what could have and should have taken place that would have been a safeguard that would have even rescued the people. Because remember, we had a clip here we were listening to of Second Officer Lightoller where he said that that ship that the Titanic was signaling was the Californian. And he said that he believed they had the captain, who was Captain Lord at that time, had every opportunity to fire up the engines, to pull up alongside and save everybody on board had they answered the SOS. Yeah, and they actually had the mast light, the big mast light, and the sailors on the Californian didn't really know they were supposed to shut up when they got back to New York. And they were telling everybody, yeah, we saw the mast light flickering at us. We thought they were maybe having some kind of an electrical problem. you know, no, they're sending you Morse code, with like strobe lights effect at your eyes. I mean, they were trying to get their attention. They were shooting off explosives. People said, well, they were shooting off all different red ones or white ones, and everybody thought it was a party. Actually, they found a box of those rockets, and as it turned out, they were missing colors of all kinds. They had were firing all different kinds of colors off there. Maybe they did think it was fireworks, but nobody got out of bed. That the Marconi officer on the Californian went to bed at 11:30, and Titanic hit. What was it? Uh, about was it I think it was 11:40, something like that, and they started sending the QCD or the SOS after midnight, shortly after midnight, and the guy wasn't at his post, and nobody aroused him to say, hey, maybe we ought to check on this and see what's going on. And they could have answered their telegraph, their distress call, and brought the Californian up and come up alongside and rescued everybody on board. That's what the second mate, Lightoller, who survived the accident, said. That's not somebody speculating. And you have these people who are, always saying it's Monday morning quarterback. No, I'm talking about the survivors, what they said. Californian ignored what happened. And then as people were rowing to it, they were rowing toward that direction. All of the people on the passenger said, see those lights? Row to that direction. They were rowing toward that ship, and then all of a sudden it went dark and
Yeah, imagine,
disappeared.
imagine if you will, for a minute, you're in the middle of the North Atlantic, okay, and one ship sees another ship start lighting off flares like it's the 4th of July weekend at like midnight, and the other ship doesn't bother to say that, like, no, by today's standards, you'd have radios, so you would have a radio operator. Then they had a telegraph, so they had a telegraph operator. The telegraph operator doesn't, but somebody doesn't say, maybe we should wake the telegraph operator and have him, communicate with the other ship to see if they're okay over there. Oh
Right.
no, they're just partying. Everything's fine. You're in the middle of the cold North Atlantic.
In an ice flow
Yeah,
area.
in the middle of an ice floe in the dead of winter. And again, the other ship is sending off flares like it's the 4th of July. That doesn't set off any warning bells
Right.
at all.
Right.
Oh, they're just partying.
Yeah. One would think they might have even heard the ghastly sound of all the steam escaping from the boilers because, I
Or
mean,
the
even
people screaming.
yeah. Well, they could have possibly heard that, but they were about possibly about 8 miles away, and that was a little distance, but it wasn't so far that they couldn't have heard the foghorn. They couldn't have heard some other things like that out there.
They
It's
could have
very
heard the horn, and they certainly could have seen the flares. And
right.
they
They did
could,
see the flares. Yeah.
right, and they which should have made them say, we should at least, wake up the telegraph operator and have him send a message, because there were officers that not everybody was asleep. Somebody had to be at the watch.
Hmm.
Somebody had the watch.
Right.
So whoever was watch standing, somebody should have woken up the telegraph operator and said, "Hey,
Hmm.
you
Find
need
out.
to
Yeah.
find out what's going on. Take 15 minutes, find out
Yeah.
what's going on with Titanic."
Right.
So why didn't they? It's
Yeah.
almost like they were told to stand down.
Right. They disappeared too in the
It's
middle of
kind
the
of
night.
weird, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very strange. Very strange. And, the odd thing about all that is that, many years later, of course, a lot of people didn't know this, but that lawsuit was still going on all the way until almost up till the time James Cameron released his film. If you'll notice in the film, Titanic, there is not one reference to the Californian. The only reference is you see a light through the wheelhouse window. That's the only reference in Titanic, the film, to the Californian. That lawsuit has still been going on after all these years against, the International Merchant Marine, which was owned by J.P. Morgan. Now, here's another thing, though, Popeye. The Californian left, I think, what was it, 4 or 5 days before the Titanic did. It wasn't as fast, but what the hell is it doing out there? It should have been way beyond that ice flow by that time. That's another surprising thing. I would think, even though it was only half as fast as the Titanic, It should have been past that ice floe and on its way to New York. What was it doing on the east side of that ice floe?
It was just kind of sitting there.
Right. It's weird, isn't it? Yeah, the whole thing is
Mm.
weird. So many questions. As I said before, just the, what you would call the cataclysmic number of strange events about all this really make me question what actually happened out there, because these things are suspicious. And, we've talked about the switch theory and all things like that. And I got into it. There's a guy up there that's got a great website who debates the switch theory. He even says, you can tell by the wreckage it wasn't the Olympic, because you can see the straight bow in the wheelhouse as opposed to the curvature, some other things like that. But the thing is simply this, that I have pressed him on that. And I said, I'm not here because I'm trying to propose a theory that I'm so smart to figure out. I'm just saying these are questions that I think haven't been answered. And I'm not talking about the switch. I'm talking about the forensics of the accident itself. And I believe that we need to find out what happened to those plates. Those plates, I think, as you and I, Popeye, did that show long ago. I didn't know anything about it until one of our callers told us. I think those plates hold the secret as to what really happened with that ship. Is it possible they were wired for explosives? I'll give you a scenario. Okay, this is a wild guess, you might say, but not necessarily wild, but it is a plausible thought. They intended to wreck that ship in that ice floe. And that's why those all of those warnings about the ice were trashed or lost. They came in. There's actually some video. I wasn't sure if it was in the movie Titanic. I think it was another piece that was done where they came in and they found the big coil for their really wonderful, beautiful Marconi set full of water. Well, let's put it this way: either it leaked or somebody sabotaged the telegraph system. That could have happened because they have Phillips and Bride, the two Marconi officers. Phillips was furious, and he went to work trying to repair that. Now, they had a backup system. Marconi rules and really rules of the sea were go to your backup system. If you can't use it, on the Titanic's wireless was so clear, you could hear it like a bell in New York City. When Titanic started tapping out their SOS, they were hearing it in New York City at the speed of light, friends. I mean, they knew they were in trouble there. But he went to work trying to repair their nice telegraph system. And they got behind on the telegraphs and everything like that they were supposed to be sending out. They were trying to reach, Cape Race and Newfoundland and some various other places like that. They got way behind on all that. So they were all these customer orders, and instead of actually dealing with the MSGs that they were supposed to deliver to the captain, who was supposed to sign those things and acknowledge that they had been received. These were the ice warnings. The one that did not make it to the wheelhouse when Lightoller was on duty at 6:30, he went to dinner. That message never reached the wheelhouse, warning them from the Californian, of all people, of where they were and what they were headed into. So they didn't get this last message because they were all backed up and with all these customers from people who wanted to say hello to grandma from the Titanic, you know what I mean, or whatever they were doing, instead of the actual navigational stuff that they were supposed to be taking care of. They did have an alternative, but I think it looks almost like that whole telegraph system was sabotaged. That's another question that you have to ask. How did that brand new system get filled with water, the big coil there in the wireless room? I mean, all these things that happen that you have to ask these questions is how can this many things go wrong over and over and over with this whole accident, which makes me wonder whether this wasn't planned. Now, here's my scenario. I'll just leave it at this. I think what they were planning to do was mimic the wreck of the Titan, Morgan Robinson's book. They were going to drive that ship into that ice floe, get all jammed up, and they had the explosives set to go off at about 2 a.m. And they were going to roll it, and it was going to go down and make it look. But what happened was they hit the lone iceberg first. It was a World Trade Center 7 moment. You know what I mean, Popeye? Something went wrong with the plan. So instead, I think, and this is really, I know a lot of people would be kind of upset with what I'm saying. I think the iceberg actually saved lives, because what happened was they were planning to hit that ice floe, and that was when they were going to blow the bottom out. And instead, they had to stop. But miraculously, the Titanic remained upright. Now, if it was going to roll on one side, you can't use lifeboats on either side, friends. And that's what happened with the wreck of the Titan. It rolled. It was going to slide off that ice floe like a dead whale into the bottom. and they were planning to blow the bottom out, and that's why the Californian warned them, and they saw that coming. They were out there to possibly pick up survivors, but something went wrong. They hit the iceberg out there first, and it stopped them dead. They had enough time to get at least 700 passengers off in the lifeboats. What was it, 1,500, something like that went down. But I think that if there's a murder motive or what happened in this situation, it went off with a hitch because they hit the light iceberg rather than the ice flow, which they would have hit after midnight. I don't know. That's just a theory. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. But I'm saying you can see that something is
Well,
definitely
there was a
wrong.
fire that was set in the coal storage area, and it was actually burning in the coal storage area before the Titanic even left. So, whether or not they actually did switch the ship or not, there was a lot of hinky stuff going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
All those
you know,
warnings. Yeah,
why did they want to sink it so bad? You know,
that's the question.
that's where the whole switch comes from. That's why people ask that question, Steve. And that's why I know there are plenty of people that are like, no, we don't think it was switched. And it's like, well, there's plenty of evidence to say that it was switched. And even if they didn't switch it, okay, even if you don't think it was switched, uh, you know, even if you want to say it wasn't switched, even if there's some evidence against it being switched, you have to admit there's a lot of evidence that there was a lot of hinky things going on, and that there's a lot of evidence that showing that it was the ship itself was purposely it looks like it was purposely sunk. So
Yeah, it does.
why would they have done it? Like, why would they have let a coal fire burn in the coal bunkers? Why? Why would they have continuously let that fire burn? Why would they have not put it out before the ship got underway?
Yeah.
Why would I can tell you as a former damage controlman, that was what my rate was in the Coast Guard. I was a damage controlman, we're firefighters. I can tell you that a fire on a ship is one of the most serious things that a ship can face. It is the most terrifying thing at sea you could face is a fire on a ship because there's no place to go. If your ship catches on fire, you are the definition of effed. There's no place to go. If your house or your building catches on fire, you can run outside. Where are you going to run if your ship catches on fire?
Yeah. The water. And
Yeah,
that's not where you want to be. Not in that
not where you
cold
want to
water.
be
No.
when you're
No.
500-600 miles out to sea.
In cold water. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
No.
why would they let that ship sail into the North Atlantic in the middle of winter with an active fire going on?
Mm. Well, there's a lot
Hmm.
of questions, and I
So if they let that fire go, if they know that there could be an active fire going on, could that be a reason to possibly scuttle the ship or abandon the ship or evacuate the ship? Or could that be an excuse that there's an emergency on the ship? Or were there were there explosives, some sort
Mhm.
of explosive planted on the ship? Explosives existed back then.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
now I'm not saying that they're going to make C4, and that they had C4 and deck cord planted all over the ship, but they could have easily have planted dynamite
Yeah.
back
And
then
thermite.
on the
Thermite
ship.
was around at
And
that time.
yes, and
Thermite. Hmm.
thermite did exist because thermite
That's
was
right.
used for welding.
That's
Now,
right.
the thermite, as people would, what you mean thermite like in the World Trade Center? No, the thermite that you would hear used in 9/11 wasn't the thermite that you would think that they had
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah. It wasn't nano. Yeah.
The thermite used in 9/11 was called nanothermite, and that is weaponized thermite that was weaponized by the United States government, by the military. Okay. Nanothermite is much different. That nanothermite is only used by the United States military, and it's literally only used as a weaponized form of thermite, and only the military has access to that. Okay. And it's real stuff. It's not fictional. It's not stuff of conspiratorial novels. It's real. You can look up Stephen Jones, look up nanothermite, and you will see that there's plenty of evidence
Yeah.
and documentation out there on that subject. But it is not the same thing.
Super explosive.
Thermite,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
It's super highly explosive, and that's the weaponized military form of it. But
Right.
thermite itself has been around for a long time. They use it to weld. Back in the day, when they were putting the railroads in, they were using it to weld railroad tracks together.
Yeah.
The railroad ties together and stuff, and they used it for welding. So it would have been very readily available
It was.
to any of these people if they wanted to perhaps use it as an incendiary to burn a hole in the ship to
Yeah.
allow water to come in.
Right.
If they wanted to use it to perhaps burn rivets. I mean, all you would have had to do was use it to melt rivets in the right spot, and those hull plates, those ships were already known to have a problem with those rivets. The
Yeah.
rivets were already known to be weak. They even talked about this in the official version of events where, oh, those rivets were, they blamed weak rivets for not being able to hold up to the cold temperatures of the North Atlantic. Okay, well, and then the rivets popping and breaking against the iceberg. Well, what if the ship was actually the Olympic and it had a tweaked keel? So now you have pressure being put on bow plates and on hull plates, rather, on the hull plates in general, and on these rivets. And then in the right spots at the right time, you have somebody on board the ship, your guy or whoever, or your men, set off thermite that was put in the that was maybe planted or placed in the area at a
Right.
previous time before the ship got underway, and it does what it's supposed to do. It weakens those rivets in those specific spots, and you have, boom, now those hull plates, they let go. Once they let go, that's it. That seawater starts coming in. There's no getting that genie back in the bottle.
Well, Popeye, I'm going to be cynical for just a minute. I'm going to say, think of the good things that happened because of the Titanic. J.P. Morgan wasn't on board, which was he was supposed to make the trip, but he had a big art museum display coming up, and so he stayed behind.
He got a cold, from what I
Yeah,
understand. He
right,
got sick suddenly. He got
right.
he got the sniffles, but then they suddenly found him in, I think it was it Paris?
Yeah, he
It
was
was Paris they found him in France with
right.
his girlfriend, one of his mistresses. "Oh, I thought you had the sniffles,
Yeah, but he didn't live much
John."
longer. He passed away just a little over a year later in Rome, of all places.
Oh,
But
tear,
yeah. But the thing that
tear.
was really good about it, though, was that he helped the JJ Astor family by taking over control of all of their fortune to handle it for the family after in this terrible time of suffering. Yes, that's right. J.P. Morgan assumed essentially the entire fortune of John Jacob Astor.
And
Wasn't that nice?
eventually
See how good that worked out? Now another nice thing.
the Astor family became known as the Vanderbilt family,
Mhm,
and, eventually their offspring, uh,
right.
created, Anderson Cooper.
Yeah, Anderson Cooper. Yeah, that was a great yeah, that was a well, that was a great idea. But another good thing that happened, though, is that, the Guggenheims were very much into mining, of course, and it was really getting cumbersome because we had so much gold and silver in our pockets that we couldn't get around, so we needed paper. So, by getting rid of, Benjamin Guggenheim, who is actually the brother to a senator out here in Colorado. They were very involved in mining, by the way. And he was out there exploring new mining possibilities around. We were so lucky that we got rid of all that gold and silver because now we have the Federal Reserve paper that's so much easier to trade with. So think of the good things that happen here. Here, the Astor fortune falls into the hands of J.P. Morgan, Guggenheim, who's involved with mining and gold and silver for coinage. We had to do away with that. It was old fashioned. We had paper now, the Federal Reserve Annual Unit of Debt, the acronym FRAUD note. We've got, you see what I'm saying? There's some weird things that kind of happen as a result of all this that are kind of odd. Also, Nikola Tesla, who was trying to develop free energy, and J.P. Morgan quit funding his Wardenclyffe experiment in 1908, was looking for a new backer, and there was a guy by the name of John Jacob Astor, who himself was an inventor as well. He was coming back to the United States, and even though he and Tesla had kind of had a falling out, they were talking about getting back together at that time. And these kinds of experiments that Tesla was going to, wireless energy, a few things. J.P. Morgan didn't like Tesla's idea of wireless energy, and he said that I can't put a meter on it, I can't make any money. But what would have happened had John Jacob Astor come back to the U.S.? That's where, by the way, Tesla lived until his later days in the Waldorf Astoria, hotel, granted to him by John Jacob Astor. And look at the fight that the Astor family, like you mentioned, Anderson Cooper, the Vanderbilts, Popeye. Look at the fight they've had with J.P. Morgan all these years trying to get their money back.
And and Isidore Straus.
Yeah, Isidore Straus. Yeah, the guy that from Macy's, of course, too.
Yes.
So you look
And
at the,
he was as well against the formation of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
See, it's amazing how these. Imagine if you had all these. You see how they have like one billionaire or a couple billionaires in a vessel in a that are missing right now, and they have like the Coast Guard, the Navy, everybody out looking for them.
Right.
Imagine if you had those same billionaires invited onto another billionaire's, and this is for the listeners because I know Steve gets this. Imagine that this is what we're trying to convey, that if you had now, and they were more than just these billionaires, there were other people like Molly Brown and others.
Yes.
But imagine that if the three people we just mentioned, Isidore Straus, Andrew Guggenheim, and John Jacob Astor, imagine if these three billionaires in particular were invited onto another billionaire's huge ocean liner. And that billionaire is supposed to actually, he's got his own suite with a gold-plated bathtub, as Steve was talking about earlier, and a gold-plated toilet. And he's supposed to be on this maiden voyage of his huge ocean liner. Suddenly he gets the sniffles and can't make it.
Right.
But go on without me on my beautiful ship. Enjoy everything, all the fine dining, everything it has to offer. I promise you'll love it.
Right.
And imagine that those three guys happen to be standing in the way of the formation of a central banking system, because those three guys weren't in banking. They were billionaires, but their wealth was not made in finance.
Right.
J.P. Morgan's wealth was. Okay. And his other buddies, their wealth was largely tied into finance. And all those guys, I mean, yeah, sure, Rockefeller, he had U.S. Standard Oil, but their wealth was largely being tied into finance. Right? That's what the whole formation of the Federal Reserve was about. They were all part of that. They were all on board with being, whatever losses they might suffer elsewhere, if they did suffer any losses financially, because, through taxes or anything, they really weren't going to suffer much. And if they did, they were going to gain because they were all going to be shareholders in the Federal Reserve System. But Astor and Guggenheim and Isidor Straus, well, they would have had bigger losses because they weren't going to be at that table. So they would have naturally stood up against the formation of that Federal Reserve System. And the people that went to Jekyll Island knew that.
Yeah.
So, what better of a way to get the people that are, because when these guys got together, they already had their meetings there were meetings going on
Oh,
before
yeah.
before
2010. Yeah.
before the whole formation of the Federal Reserve. So
Right.
they already understood like who was going to get in their way. So
Right.
what better of a way to get people that are going to be in your way out of your way than that are billionaires than if you own something that you know you're already going to sink, like a huge seagoing vessel, and you invite them on it, and
Yeah.
then you make sure it sinks. And people have said, well, how do you ensure that they don't get off because they're billionaires, Popeye? Okay, back then, okay, and even today, it's children, women and children first. But back then it was extremely women and children first, and it was enforced women and children first. So didn't matter if you were a billionaire at that point, women and children first. And if they did try to get into because they knew that if they tried to get into those boats and make it back to land, just like you saw Ismay, the architect of the ship, he was like publicly shamed for coming back.
Yeah, that was Ismay was the owner, CEO. It was Anderson who was the architect, but you brought up
Or yeah,
Ismay.
he was the owner. He was
Yeah.
publicly shamed for coming back.
Well, do you know how he escaped?
Ismay?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the story. Okay. As you look back, one of the first things we did see on the wreckage was the davit first collapsible boat. I believe it was D, or was it B? It was up on the wheelhouse. Okay, what had happened was, as they were finally getting people loaded, all of a sudden there was a rush. The first few boats left almost half full. People did not want to be lowered down into that cold water in the middle of the night. They wanted to stay on board, so they could have had more passengers on board. But as people started to realize this ship is going down, they started crowding. There was no place left. Well, there were submersible boats up, or what they call collapsible. What do I mean, submersible? Yeah, a collapsible boats that they were up on top of the wheelhouse on the officers' quarters. Ismay went up to the top. He knew where they were, and he unpacked one of these collapsibles, and they got ready to lower it. He had several people put on board, and he said, I'm going to go down below to see if I can help out. If I don't come back in 1 minute, I want you to lower this boat. Lower it. Okay, get it out of here. So he got the boat all loaded. It was about half full, or a few more people, because not that many people were on top of on the officers' quarters, really knowing at that time what was going on. They were on the decks trying to get into the lifeboats. The collapsible was raised over, it dropped down. As it came down to the lower deck, Ismay jumped inside. That's how he got away. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, the boat wasn't all that full. And I mean, you might as well. I mean, somebody could say, hey, look, no one else is going to get into this. I might as well. I mean, if you were there and you were thinking, I'm going to get off this boat and I'm jumping into that one, you might think for yourself, I'd do that. But it's almost like Ismay knew exactly where a boat would be. Now, what if that ship would have rolled over inside an ice floe? Where would be the only place to survive? On the top deck, on the collapsibles. Okay, think about that for a moment. Ismay knew exactly where to go to get into the final boat that got off of that off the Titanic.
Yeah, why were they launching lifeboats half full, Steve?
Well, people didn't want to go in. They didn't want to.
Yeah,
they were. Yeah, the first beginning.
I know they should have filled them up with the women and the children, and regardless, they should have filled them up. They were launching them. They were launching them
Well, they did in the
and
end. Everybody rushed in
yeah,
the end, but they didn't
well,
realize it, and they didn't have they
they
had to
should have
balance it a
they
little bit
shouldn't have
too.
allowed them. The officers, the ship's officers, shouldn't have. They were negligent. They were. There was a lot of there was a lot of like negligence amongst the ship's crew at the time. I mean, I hate to Monday morning quarterback something 110 years on, you know, but there was a lot of negligence amongst the ship's officers at the time. I
Yeah,
mean, some of them were panicking. I'm sure they were under an
yeah,
intense amount of stress,
yeah,
but there was there was a level of negligence. They should have honestly. This was the first time out on that ship. I don't think anybody was properly trained. I think there was a level of arrogance all around that ship just couldn't sink. So I don't think anybody really had trained for it.
yeah. It was.
I just think
Uh,
that everybody thought that it couldn't happen. That's why they didn't have enough lifeboats on it. They had more people on that ship than they did lifeboats, and then they started launching them half full.
mhm.
So it was like, all right, well now you've already doomed you. There's already a bunch of people on the ship that are going to die because there's not enough lifeboats, and now you're dooming more people because you're launching the lifeboats half full.
Yeah. Well, they started rushing towards the end. At first, people were really reluctant, and they had to try to pry them on there because
Yeah,
they said, if you're in a ship and it's just listing a little bit, and you're out in the middle of the ocean, and they're saying we're going to drop you down about 30 feet into the dark water. A lot of people were saying, I'm not so sure I want to do that. They didn't realize at first what was happening. People were actually telling someone, now don't worry, it's just an exercise. We'll have you all back on board by morning for breakfast. And a lot of people didn't want to get in. So
that's
the
why
first,
I'm saying they were
yeah,
negligent in their
yeah,
duties.
they
They
didn't
should have been
know.
like, "You need to get in the lifeboat now because this is an emergency, and I
Yeah.
don't know if the ship's gonna be here in 20 minutes. So get your ass in the lifeboat. I'm gonna." You're right. They were like, "Oh, it's just a drill. Everything will
Hmm.
be fine." They were telling people to go back to their rooms.
Yeah, people did. A lot of
Yeah, they
people
were
did
like,
go
"It's
back to their rooms.
fine.
Yeah.
It's fine." They did that on 9/11 too, man. They told
Yeah.
people to go
Same
back to
thing.
their offices in the World Trade Center. They told
Yeah.
people everything was fine.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they did the same exact thing. They told people everything, and that's. I mean, I get it. That sometimes that's people that are scared, just trying to like take control and calm everybody down so that there's not a mass panic. And I think that's partially them like projecting their inner, like they're trying to calm themselves down and they're trying to project that outward to calm everybody else down.
Yeah.
But that doesn't do anybody any good because that's not helping anybody in that situation.
Yeah. I agree.
You don't want
Popeye.
anybody panicking, but they should have. I mean, they should have filled the boats. They should have taken. They should have taken whatever uh, you know collapsible boats they had. Folded them up, or unfolded them and gotten people into the water, and then
Yeah.
the boat shouldn't have set sail the way it was. That really, honestly, even if it was, let's take out the switch situation for a minute. Let's say it really was the Titanic. The ship shouldn't have set sail the way it was. The crew was kind of, crew was fresh, and I don't think they had the proper training on the ship. They, as a former coastie, they didn't. I think they were too arrogant. When you look back on it, I think they were too arrogant. I think they thought the ship couldn't sink, so they were too arrogant, and they didn't worry about what should we do if. That's why they weren't worried about the lifeboats. They weren't worried about any of that. That's why when it came time for for the crap to hit the fan, what did they do? They didn't do things right. They were sending lifeboats out half full. They were, panicking.
Yeah.
Like Cameron shows that one scene where the officer loses it and he shoots himself in
Oh
the
yeah. It
head.
was Murdoch. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like
Although, yeah,
you
that might have been controversial too. I think.
well, right. That was controversial. Some people, debate whether that happened or not, and whether or not it happened. It's it shows the level of stress. It shows the level of it shows that it was I. It could have been his dramatic interpretation of like the level of stress but
Yeah.
it showed he did show that there was a level of like just incompetence and like there
What
was a
else do you
level of
do at that point? Yeah.
right.
Well,
There
you
was
know,
there was a there was a level of incompetence amongst the officers and crew on the ship. Again, I think it was because everybody really did believe the line that they were fed, that that ship was unsinkable. I mean,
Right.
look, you know, the architect even believed his own babble that it was unsinkable until he realized it wasn't
Yeah, it
unsinkable.
was gonna go down. Yeah,
Right.
he Anderson. You know, it's interesting though, because when you look back at those the records and everything like that that came through, uh, both of the Marconi officers were able to get off the ship with the logs, and Bride survived. Phillips got cold and froze and died of exposure. But the one guy who I believe that was pretty legitimate that survived was the second mate Lightoller. He was up on the top of the wheelhouse when the ship shook off and started to break apart, and he was swept off. Well, he was swept off into the water. What happened was one of the huge funnels came loose and came down. He said it missed me by inches. And as the hot funnel hit the water below him, he said it actually wasn't cold because I was in warm water for a few minutes, for not few minutes, but for a few seconds. He was paddling around there. One of the collapsibles in the wake of the funnel coming down had capsized. So he swam over and grabbed a hold of the collapsible and held on to it for a while. And then one of the other boats came around and helped them right the collapsible and got inside and survived. So he was a legitimate survivor and probably the most authoritative of all the crew that survived that accident. And you can hear his interview in that clip. He did a radio interview in 1938 about what happened, where he claimed, yes, it was the Californian that we were talking to, and they weren't responding. And he also basically talked about the final missing warning of the ice situation, which is another suspicious thing. He went to dinner at 6:30, I think it was, in the evening. And then Murdoch would take over control that night, and he was off about 10 o'clock. But he was at dinner when the last message, which was marked I think it was the code was MSG, which meant this was a message that the captain was to be alerted to, signed, and respond. There should have been a response to it. Somehow that message got lost. It never made it to the wheelhouse. It never made it up to the bridge. And no one knows really why that message got lost. Again, this could have been something very, very strange. It could have been crept by somebody who was another one of these people who had been possibly sabotaging all the communications on the Titanic as well. But it never reached the bridge, and it was supposed to be seen by the captain and signed to be sent back. So they did not get that last warning about the ice at 6:30 in the evening. And of course, it'd be what, about 4 or 5 hours later at 10:40, I think, or what was it, 11:40, I think it was, maybe when they hit the iceberg, that they didn't even really realize how deep the problem was ahead, though they should have known for a long time. There were so many messages about the ice flow there that it's hard to believe the Titanic didn't respond to them the way they should have. And that's a question about that possible interference with the communications of Popeye. That you there again, how is it that beautiful system that the Titanic had got waterlogged, on its maiden voyage and had to be scrapped and repaired by Phillips, which he shouldn't have done. And he should have stayed with their backup system, but he went to work on that. And they got backed up, and then they weren't getting these messages like they should have. I mean, there's another one of those things that it seems like it's a little odd that it happened along the way, the communications of the whole thing. But when they finally got back up and they were sitting out their QCD, even the Olympic, the other ship, the Olympic, the real Olympic or the other Olympic was out there and heard the message. Carpathia heard it. All these ships heard it. They heard the SOS message instantaneously all over the world with this clear sounding bell in the Titanic telegraph Marconi system. And Bride had to answer questions in both inquiries in Britain and also in the United States. And he still said we sent the message up, and it was supposed to get to the wheelhouse, but it never did. It never did reply to it. So it was some odd things that happened there as well.
I actually found that uh, the it's a 23-minute 20 yeah, it's 22 minutes and 37 seconds. It's a radio broadcast from 1936
Yeah, right. It's
from
great.
Commander Lightoller from him talking about. It's titled "I Was There"
Yeah.
by Commander Lightoller. I actually have found the radio broadcast. I could play it, but
Yeah,
first
let's play it. Yeah.
I can play it. We should play the U.S. Coast Guard press conference
Yes. Yeah, we never got to. Did
about
we ever get?
about the submersible.
Yeah. Is that the
So
latest one now? I think the latest press
the
conference.
one, well, they put out a press release at around about it was probably about 10:30, it was close to about 10 o'clock or so, a little bit after around 10 o'clock or so. They put out a press release saying that they had pulled back the air assets because they'd been out since this morning. They had two C-130 Hercules aircraft flying out, and the Air Force had a C-130. Canada had a C-130, plus they had another aircraft. I can't remember what it was that they had out there. The C-130s can fly for about 10 to 12 hours.
Yeah.
And then they got to go back and they got to fuel up. They're long haul aircraft. They can fly long distances and for a long period of time. Depending on how how far the distance they got to travel, and then all that. And but they called off all their air assets, and it's night. I mean, they can fly at night, but they're not going to see anything,
Yeah.
especially if they're looking for a submersible at night. You
Right.
ain't going to see anything out there at night. It's
They
pitch
haven't, they
black.
haven't heard anything under the water. They're not going to see anything in
Right.
the sky.
You're not
Yeah.
going to see anything at
Yeah.
night. So
Yeah.
what they're gonna do is they're gonna have surface vessels. They're gonna continue the search with surface vessels, meaning ships, and
Yeah.
they'll bring the air assets back out, at first light. So they recalled all the air assets for the evening, let the crews sleep, maintain the aircraft, make sure everything is a-okay in the aircraft, fuel them up, get them ready, and then come morning they'll send them back out.
Right.
But what I'll do is I'm gonna play the audio and video from the Coast Guard press briefing about the
Yeah.
submersible,
Let's do it.
and then I will play the
Lightoller
the
piece.
Lightoller piece, because that's really good. It's
Yeah.
and it's the entire radio broadcast from the BBC from 1936.
Right.
And people are like, "Wait, I thought you guys were just talking about the submersible." We totally went down the
Oh, we did.
conspiracy rabbit hole, but we
We
always do
did.
whenever we talk about the Titanic.
Yeah.
Steve and I haven't gotten a chance to talk about the new stuff, because he didn't know until earlier today when I was talking to him that they had scanned it, and I said, they like 3D rendered the whole wreck
Yeah.
site, and he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And when I had heard they scanned it, I was like, "Oh, this should be interesting. I'd like to take a look at it." And then in the same article
In the same
and
breath.
the
Yeah.
press briefing, in the same breath, they were like, "Yeah," and the new scans show that the official version of events couldn't have happened. And I was like, "Oh, well, isn't that interesting?
Right.
Huh?
Yeah. After all this
Gee,
time.
I
Yeah.
guess after all this time." And then they said that it looks like there's a hole blown in the bottom of the ship, and I was like, "Oh,"
Hmm.
and I looked at Ratchick and I was like, "Gee,
That's what
did,
we
did
said.
have Steve and I been proven right? Because we said that like 10 years ago,
We suggested that was probably what happened, and I
and
think,
people said we were
yeah.
crazy. People,
Hmm.
I remember being like laughed at, and people were like, "What? You guys are you trying to say they building 7 the Titanic?" And we were like, "Yeah, actually we are.
Yep. That's
We
right. Controlled
we're trying to
demolition.
say they blew it up."
Yeah, looks like it. Sure does. That's why we got to study those plates. And if we did launch any kind of a investigative exploration, I would do it with drones, and I just send them down to cut some pieces off that thing and bring them back up and look at it. It's a long ways from the ship, but let's go ahead and play the clips. Popeye's getting we're dragging people on. I think it's getting kind of late, and let's see what if they'll listen in and see what they think.
Yeah, people love these late night streams. We got a ton of listeners over on Rumble right now.
Wow.
Shout out to the Rumble listeners. Thank
Hey,
you
Rumblers. Yeah.
to the Rumble listeners over at Rabbit Hole Radio on Rumble, and shout out to the people over on DTRH Radio Archives over on YouTube.
Yep. Yep.
All my longtime listeners over there. There's a lot of longtime listeners tuning in over on the YouTube channel. Thank you all. I'm gonna bring up the first I'll bring up the U.S. Coast Guard
Yeah,
press
cool.
conference here, and then I'll bring up the
Lightoller Pete. Yeah.
let me bring this up first.
Press conference from earlier.
You're gonna hear them. You'll hear them like they get asked about whether or not it hit the wreckage, and they don't really answer whether or not they think it hit the wreckage. They kind of skirt the issue, Steve, which makes me wonder if that's what that was when they don't answer it. It's like, they have to have thought of that it hit it, and then there was
Could be collision. Mm-hmm.
yes. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. There's not too many things that could happen under the ocean.
Yeah.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chief Petty Officer Robert Simpson. I'm the Assistant Public Affairs Officer for the 1st Coast Guard District in Boston, Massachusetts. In just a minute, I'll introduce Rear Admiral John Mauger, Commander of the 1st Coast Guard District. I'm prepared to give you a brief update on the case going on 900 miles east of Cape Cod in the search for 5 submariners. We do ask, following his brief statement, we'll be able to take a few questions and answers. We do ask that we give everybody the opportunity to ask one question, and if we have it to go through, we can be able to ask further questions beyond that. We only have time today for about 10 minutes, so he has a brief statement on here, and at this time, I'd like to introduce Admiral John Mauger.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rear Admiral John Mauger. I'm the commander of the 1st Coast Guard District here in Boston, Massachusetts. And in this case, I am the lead for the Coast Guard search and rescue operations for the overdue submersible out near the wreck of the Titanic. Yesterday afternoon, we were notified by the operator of the submersible vessel that it was overdue, and it had 5 persons on board the submersible. So we're working very closely at this point to make sure that we're doing everything that we can do to locate the submersible and rescue those on board. Our thoughts are with the crew members and the families on board, of those on board the submersible at this time. And we are doing everything that we can do to make sure that we can locate and rescue those on board. So after receiving the call, we reached out to the vessel Polar Prince and began a surface search looking for the submersible. At the same time, we launched a C-130 aircraft to conduct an aerial search, both visual and radar of the scene. We've subsequently coordinated with the Canadian Coast Guard and Canadian Armed Forces to deploy additional assets to the scene. The Canadians have had a C-130 aircraft searching as well, in addition to also having a P-8 submarine search aircraft deploy as well, and put sonar buoys in the water in attempt to listen. The location of the search is approximately 900 miles east of Cape Cod in a water depth of roughly 13,000 feet. It is a remote area, and it is a challenge to conduct a search in that remote area. But we are deploying all available assets to make sure that we can locate the craft and rescue the people on board. Going into this evening, we will continue to fly aircraft and move additional vessels into the area. In this remote part of our search and rescue responsibility, oftentimes we rely on commercial operators to be the first vessels on scene. And so we've been in touch with additional commercial vessels that are operating in the area. as well as initiating the movement of additional Canadian Coast Guard assets and U.S. Coast Guard surface asset into the area over the course of the next couple of days. Adding to the complexity of this case is the fact that this was a submersible vessel. And so we need to make sure that we're looking both on the surface for the vessel if it had surfaced back to the water, but it somehow lost communications with the vessel. And that's what the aircraft and the surface search vessel is allowing us to do right now. But we're also having to search in the water column. And we're doing that right now with the use of sonar buoys and sonar on the ship that's out there to listen for any sounds that we can detect in the water column. Over the course of the next couple of days, we anticipate adding additional capability to conduct additional search in the water as those commercial assets arrive on scene. Again, our thoughts are with the families and the crew members on board the submersible, and we're working very closely with all U.S. And international partners to provide any capability that we can provide to search for the overdue vessel and rescue the crew members on board. At this point, we'll take questions.
There were reports that someone may be trapped in wreckage in the Titanic. Is this even possible? If that were the case, how much oxygen will these people have?
So in terms of locating the overdue submersible, we have to make sure that we're looking on both the surface using aerial and surface vessels, but then expanding into underwater search as well. Right now, our capability is limited to sonar buoys and listening for sounds, but we're working very hard to increase the capability. We understand from the operator of the vessel that the vessel was designed with a 96-hour sustainment capability if there was an emergency on board. And so we're using that time, making the best use of every moment of that time to locate the vessel.
So can you talk about who was on board exactly? And is there somebody in Hamish Harding, a British explorer, who confirmed that he's on board?
At this point, I'm not in a position to confirm the identity of anybody on board the vessel. Out of respect for the families, we're going through the notification process, and more updates will be forthcoming.
Sorry, I may be jumping to something here, but it seems like if that vessel will be sitting on the bottom, the 96-hour window to reach it, that this is a race to get some sort of rescue vehicle down to it. Am I correct about that?
That's absolutely part of the overall planning for this search case. Right now, we're focused on locating the vessel, but at the same time, if we find this vessel in the water, then we will have to effect some sort of rescue or coordinating, reaching out to different partners within the U.S. Navy, within the Canadian Armed Forces, and within private industry to understand what underwater rescue capability might be available.
Are there any vessels on the way there that could do that? Get down there?
So at this moment, we're focused on the search and understanding the capabilities of the vessels that are deploying to the scene.
And can your sonar measure as deep as 13,000?
So the sonar capabilities within the sonar buoys and within the hull of the commercial vessel that is out there operating on site, those aren't Coast Guard sonars. They are capable of listening to a depth of 13,000 feet, as I understand.
Some of the numbers here, you mentioned that there were 96 hours of oxygen. How much of the 96 hours do you believe maybe if they are submerged? And also, what is the square mileage of your search right now?
So in terms of the square mileage of the search, I don't have that number right at this moment, but it includes both a surface area that we're looking at and a subsurface area. And so we'll get you the exact number for the square mileage of the search. In terms of the hours, we understood that that was 96 hours of rescue or emergency capability from the operator. And so we anticipate that there's somewhere between 70 to the full 96 hours available at this point.
Do you believe that the sub would be in a location near the Titanic? And if so, what are some of the challenges with sonar and a debris field that the Titanic had faced?
So it's certainly the purpose of the submarine was to, as I understand, the purpose of the submersible was to provide opportunity to visit the wreck site and explore the wreck site. So that's a possibility. Again, right now our focus is getting on as much capability into the area as we can and understanding that full capability of those assets that are being deployed. Our aerial assets that are being deployed have the capability to do both visual and radar searches, and the Canadians asset had the ability to drop sonar buoys and listen. And so we're using all that information to improve our search capability.
And if it is a case that it's on the what does that look like?
So we're working through that right now, but what we're really focused on at the moment is really locating the vessel, which could either be in the surface or subsurface. And so we're bringing in technical expertise to understand both the dynamic and underwater rescue operations. So as search and rescue professionals, we work very, very hard, and our crews take this personally. Our first thoughts are with the crew members and the families of those on board. And so we want to make sure that we have done absolutely everything that we can do to locate their family members and bring them home safe. And so they're first and foremost in our thoughts every moment of this search operation.
So how common are these wrecks to the Titanic in general, and how dangerous are they even without emergency taking place?
I don't have any details on how often folks visit the wreck site there at Titanic, nor any specific comments on the dangers involved. Certainly, every time ships go to sea, they encounter hazards and dangers. And so having properly prepared vessels, properly prepared crew members, and making sure that you practice emergency procedures, good practical advice for anybody that goes to sea.
What's happening specifically with the families of those people involved right now? Are you in contact with them? Is there a staging right for them? What's happening?
So at this point, I'm not going to discuss any information about the families and communications with the families. And so we'll provide that with future updates.
Any idea of the number of personnel searching? Is it dozens, hundreds?
So the Coast Guard has two C-130 aircraft. In addition to the command team that's working here, we have two C-130 aircraft deployed. The Canadians have a C-130 aircraft and a P-8 aircraft. We also have access to, and we'll launch this evening, a C-130 aircraft from the New York National Guard to make sure that we have sufficient air assets up there. On the surface, we have the commercial operator that's been on site, and we're bringing additional surface search assets into play, which will also bring in some subsurface search capability. Last question, please.
How many are company employees? How many are people who are paid to be on?
I understand from the operator that there was one pilot or submersible commander operator on board, and that there were 4 mission specialists on board is the term that the operator uses for them. So five total. You have to ask the operator what that means. What we're focused on is finding those 5 people. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for coming today. This does conclude this portion of the briefing. I can stay behind just to take any other questions down, and we can get back to you at a later time, and we will be able to connect directly with you. I know you had the question about the square mileage area. Do you have a card with you? Okay. Were there any additional questions?
Yeah. Do you have any idea, 96 hours, Sunday morning, that we were missing, that's when the clock started, right? Sunday morning?
So I'm not sure on the exact time of when it started. As far as the communications on there was the 96 hours total on there. I'm not sure if that's the amount of time total that it can stay underwater, or if that starts another time. We can clarify and get back to you on that. Right.
Let's see. I think he's just. I don't know, he's got a star above his anchor, and it looks like he's just.
Right. When did that clock start for the 96 hours?
Looks like he's just a chief. Yeah. I don't know if he's not a senior chief. He's just a chief.
Not much new there.
I shouldn't say just. He's a chief. But that was the gist, and he ends up taking questions down from the reporters, and then that's where they ask a few other questions, but that was the admiral that you saw there, and this is up in Boston, and this is where the search is being led from, and they haven't done another press conference since. This was at I want to say it was 4:30 this afternoon, so a little less than 12 hours ago, about 10 and a half hours ago, 10 hours ago. They probably won't do another one till tomorrow afternoon. Knowing the Coast Guard, they won't do another one till probably tomorrow afternoon, sometime between noon and 4, if they do another one. And this was video footage that I had to pull from. They don't live stream their stuff. They have audio that they'll stream, but they don't live stream it. I had to pull it from another news source. The Coast Guard just, they have a public relations rate. They're called PAs, public affairs. You'd think that in 2023 they'd actually, I don't know, have live streaming capabilities, but for some reason they do not. So he takes a couple more questions, and I could sit and let it play, but it's really not. It's just them asking him questions, and then he tries his best to give really some answers, but it's not really official because he's not. He just takes the questions. He's not. He's not the admiral, so he's not really allowed to officially give answers. So.
Yep, we'll just have to wait and see. Yeah,
we have to wait and see what else they
Right.
say. He's not gonna, he's not gonna be allowed to really give any answers. So, and, even though he's a chief, he's not, the guy with the 2 stars on his lapel outranks him by a few steps. So the chief's not going to be allowed to give any more answers than what the admiral did. So we're not gonna. They don't really know. As you heard and saw, they don't really know. And how could they? They haven't even found it yet. They haven't really even got on site with surface vessels yet. It's 900 miles east of Cape Cod. They get air assets out there. They can fly over the area, but they really don't have any surface vessels out there other than what was out there when they launched the submersible. That's why he said, you heard him say, we rely on commercial vessels to get there first to try to help as best they can until we can get, Coast Guard assets on scene. There's Canadian Coast Guard vessels. There's 3 of them en route that I saw earlier today that were en route out there. And there's American Coast Guard vessels en route that are on their way out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take a while for any of those vessels to get out there, even if they're traveling at 20, 25, even 30 knots, if they were able to travel that fast. It's going to take a while for them to be able to get out there. It's going to take a couple days. So and the Coast Guard is going to have better capabilities, sonar capabilities, but even the vessel that's on scene has sonar capabilities that are good enough to go down far enough to where they'd be able to see the vessel. The problem is they don't have enough vessels to cover a wide enough area. They need to create a search grid, like a box, so that they can, and then put enough vessels inside that box to create, start pinging the entire box with sonar and laying buoys. That one ship could create a box if they've got enough sonar buoys, but I mean, I don't know how many sonar buoys that one vessel has.
Yeah.
Whereas if that's why you get the Canadian Coast Guard out there and the US Coast Guard out there. You get 5 or 6 vessels out there with enough sonar capabilities. You can create a box with the ships and you start pinging active sonar, and you could ding, da-ding, ding, da-ding, ding, da-ding, ding, and you're going to create a sonar map, and you'll be able to see what's down there using active sonar. You'll be able to see what you can't see with your eyes. Those guys can't do that right now. They got one vessel. Even if they got a couple sonar buoys, I doubt they have enough to create. They can maybe create a small box, but I mean, I doubt they have enough sonar buoys to pull off. They might be able to make something small, but to search the area that they need to search, they probably do not have enough assets on board that commercial vessel. They are definitely going to need a larger amount of, and the ships aren't going to be, the planes aren't going to be able to toss anything out that would be of any use to the commercial vessel anyway. You would need, it's not going to, link up with their systems. You'd need to have Coast Guard assets or Navy assets on the ground, or on deck and on station to be able to utilize anything like that anyway. So that's why you have the Canadian Coast Guard and the American Coast Guard headed out there. Once those ships get out there and they're able to get some assets on scene, like I said, then they'll be able to start setting up a search pattern, and they'll be able to start, then they can start using sonar. But right now, they can't do anything.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll probably get a report from the launch vessel out there and those people who actually assisted and were there when the submersible, the Titan, went down, started its descent. We haven't heard anything from them as far as I know, but, that's going to be followed up pretty quickly here, I suppose.
I'm actually kind of surprised that they didn't. I mean, they weren't. Not one person asked during that whole press conference about anything about if they're, the possibility of any type of disaster with the vessel. It's amazing how that hasn't sunk in yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we pointed out, these things happen very fast at that depth.
It's like they know, they just don't
know
want to say it because it's the first day. Maybe they want to drag. I don't know. The media wants to drag it out for clicks. I don't know.
I don't know what the rise time is, but I think
About maybe 10 hours.
Is that how long it takes to get up from that depth? Or
with that, the submersible, they said it wouldn't be like if they dropped the ballasts, it would take like 10 hours.
10 hours, huh? That's a
for them to slowly rise. So I mean, they disappeared. It was like an hour and a half into their journey. It was somewhere. It was like around 11 o'clock in the morning, somewhere around there. I think it was on Sunday morning. So
yeah, it's been 30.
So like 24 hours as of this morning.
Yeah. Wow. Well, without contact, which they would have to keep with the surface, that's a real problem at this point.
Right, and then you're only got a certain amount of battery power. You only got a certain amount of oxygen, and then the oxygen. Your oxygen scrubbers are only good for so long. So, and then your battery power, I mean, without battery power, none of that stuff's going to work. Honestly, I think you have some sort of catastrophic, uh, some sort of uh, issue where there was a compromise to the hull, and before they even knew what hit them, it was over.
That's what he said would happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't. Well, I mean, you wouldn't, dude, at that depth and at that pressure. It's not like, in the movies where you see the hull
water
start to
pouring
shake.
in.
Yeah, you start to see the hull start to shake, and you see
Yeah.
the water start to come in. Pss, 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 pss. That's not how it happens. It's boop, and it's over.
Yeah.
It's just over. It's you don't even you 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 don't even have a chance to blink, and it's 1 minute you're there, and the next minute you're wherever, whatever you believe in, your heaven,
You're gone.
whatever, you're gone. And
Yeah.
I mean, at least if that's what happened, at least nobody suffered.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
it's a terrifying way to go. So like, at least nobody suffered, but there's no way to prevent that at that depth, right? So there's no way to get out of that.
Right.
And I don't think, I think, understanding, knowing the Coast Guard, I know why the Admiral didn't say anything. I understand why he didn't say anything, because our job when I was in the Coast Guard, like, our job was to go out there and we're search and rescue. So he's not going to, right off the bat, they haven't even found it yet. They haven't seen any wreckage. They haven't seen anything yet. So they're not going to go out and, be like, oh, well, we think it could have, no one even knows what the hell's going on yet. So they haven't even gotten any assets on scene. Now, once the Coast Guard gets assets on scene and they start doing searches and they start looking, then then the clock starts ticking. Then there's a clock, that within a reasonable amount of time, it's like, okay, we've been looking for a week. We have to be realistic now. Something must have happened, or we've been looking for 72 hours. Something must have happened, depending on the situation. The clock starts to tick. Then it goes from a rescue to possible recovery. But that's, when we have to get on scene first. In this situation, they're being told by the people who make the submersible that they've got up to 90 hours worth of oxygen. Well, that goes up to about Thursday. So tomorrow's only Tuesday, or, it's 2 a.m. where I am. So it's Tuesday morning. So they have, if they're still alive, then there's the possibility, it could be like a dramatic movie. Like I said earlier, it sounds like the script from a movie, with the cast of characters that's in the sub. It very well could be that they are alive. But if I use Occam's razor, Steve, it's just, I don't know. I think something catastrophic happened. And it could be very well simple that there was just something, compromise in the hull. The pressure got too great. They got down to a certain depth, and poop, that was it. Or they hit the ship, or they hit, like you said, there's plenty of pieces where there's just a couple pieces of ship being strewn around, and because they couldn't see, they could have come down too close. They could have been coming down, and they could have come down where, into the debris field, and they could have come down just too close to a piece of debris and not realizing it, come up. And as they were coming up on a piece of debris, hit the piece of debris and just bumped it. And just that tap on the piece of debris, could have gotten too close to it. Maybe as they were coming up on it, didn't realize that there was something sticking out and tapped it. And all they got to do is hit it the wrong way and it's over. It's that quick.
Yeah.
Something simple and stupid as that. And but they won't know until they start at least getting the sonar. Once they start getting sonar readings, then they'll know, because they already have the whole wreckage area mapped out. especially having that new 3D imaging of the area, they'll be able to, once they start getting assets on scene and they can start doing sonar scans of the area of the sea floor, they might pick up a mass on the sea floor that doesn't jive with any of the other previous scans.
Yeah.
And then they'll know, uh-oh, there's a mass of something on the seafloor. So, I mean, there's ways to tell that there's something down there, and then they'll have to send other submersibles, and if they don't find anything in the next couple days, like floating on the surface, and they find some sort of sonar reading, they start to get pings back from the bottom of the ocean floor, and they can, like I said, they can just do sonar scans of the ocean floor and compare them to, but especially now that like I said, there's that new 3D scan of the whole wreckage area.
Yeah.
Well, they could use that and compare the two. So with modern technology and computers, they'll be able to do a lot of this stuff. So
right. Well, time will tell. We'll just have to wait it out. There's not much we can do except for to see, whether they'll find anything. I think it's kind of doubtable, that they will, expect to find anybody alive at this point. I think maybe I'm being very negative, but without any communications and without any ability to actually detach any ballast or something like that and come up automatically, by this time, I would think there's a problem. There's something happened. Yeah. So, tough story here, of course. But again, this is the kind of stuff that a lot of Argonauts have done over the years. We've known a lot of people. The Thresher went down many years ago. You know what I mean? We've certain sites. There's a lot of shipwrecks around the world, all over the place. The Titanic is still out there, lying on its side in the Mediterranean. It took them years to find that. They didn't even, and they would have known pretty much where it was, and it's not that deep. And it's still out there. The Britannic was very similar, of course, to the Titanic. When Olympic, Britannic, and Titanic were all very close to the same ship, and it was torpedoed or it hit a mine. They say, was it World War One or was it World War II? I can't remember the story that well anymore. But there was a lady who was actually a nurse and a person who has been on all three of the ships. She was on the Titanic, she was on the Britannic, and the Lusitania. She survived all three of them. I wouldn't want to get on a boat with her anywhere. I'm so sorry, you know what I mean? But not funny. But the fact is, there have been several people.
Nah.
Yeah.
If she's on a ship, you don't want to get on it with her.
No, right? No, or stay really close to her. One or the other. But it's seagoing ships have been sinking for many, many years, and now this is the next epic. Part of all this is the deep underwater ships that we're talking about nowadays, and we've seen a lot of submarines that have gone down and. In the years gone by, and they still are finding Russian and German subs all over the world today. They found a German sub not too long ago, I think, off the East Coast, and there are still a lot of these ships down there, and people will have gone down with them in many cases, and sometimes it's shallow and sometimes it's very deep. But I guess we still got if you want to play the clip with Lightoller, I don't know what else we can say. Popeye.
Yeah, I'm getting that actually set up.
Yeah. Well, again, I would pose the challenge not because I think I have the answer and I have a theory and want to be proven right. Because if I'm wrong, I'd like to know. Hey, I'm learning. I'm just about learning. But I think if they actually took a good look at those plates, the two middle hull plates that blew apart and are lying about 3/4 of a mile from the wreckage, you will know whether some form of explosive or controlled demolition took those plates out. Whatever it was that broke those plates out, I think, is what sunk the Titanic. and they're lying a long ways away. There was a documentary where they reconstructed the whole Titanic, visual reconstruction of it. They have a couple guys walking so you can see the size of the scale of it as they walk out to see this ship being put together, and the pieces start to fly together. And as they walk by, you can see them walk by those plates. Now, remember, they're 3/4 of a mile from where the ship is, but in the illustration, they're right close to next to where the ship is being reconstructed. And the last two things that you see are those two plates that come up to the bottom of the Titanic. The very two places we've been talking about that James Cameron used in his illustrations, and I don't buy his banana peel illustration that he used. I think James Cameron knows what really happened. I think he does. That's and but there's a lot of secrets about this. These are things that, like I said before, there was no mention of the Californian in the movie Titanic, and yet there was A Night to Remember, an old film that had the Californian in it. A lot of these others do too. So we got the clip ready to go pretty much. I think you're going to like this. If you haven't heard it before, Lightoller was the second mate, or the second officer in command, and he was the one who did the navigation, actually gave the coordinates for where the Titanic was when he took his evening star chart readings, and survived. Luckily, barely survived. He was pulled aboard out of the water after he was swept off the deck, and just barely missed being crushed by one of the funnels that came down near him. And he tells you that. And he also tells you about the Californian, and he also tells you about that strange missing telegram. This is an immortal piece of that history.
Yeah, here we go.
I was there. Talks by men who saw the making of history. Nowadays, a passenger to America has no misgivings. But nearly a generation ago, a terrible catastrophe in mid-ocean had to mark the end of an era of peril in Atlantic transport. On the 15th of April, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg, and in a couple of hours, the great liner had sunk on her maiden voyage at a cost in human life of 1,500 souls. Commander Lightoller was second officer, and when he had seen the last of the insufficient lifeboats pull away from the ship, he plunged into the sea and was ultimately rescued. All the other officers who went down with the ship were drowned. Commander Lightoller.
Altogether, I have had 4 shipwrecks and a fire during my 30-odd years at sea. But by far and away the worst of them all was the one I'm going to tell you about now, the loss of the Titanic. I joined her in Belfast while she was still in the builder's hands, the biggest and finest ship in the world. And given the normal life of a ship, I'm pretty sure she would have proved the fastest. But let me say right here and now, neither that night nor that voyage were we out for any records. We ran our trials in Belfast Lough, and then took her round to Southampton. On April the 10th, that's 1912, she sailed on her maiden and only voyage for New York. From the moment we left Belfast, we had marvelous weather. And even when we got out on the Western Ocean, or Atlantic, as you probably know it, it was as smooth as the proverbial mill pond, not a breath of wind, and the sea like a sheet of brass. In any other circumstances, those conditions would have been ideal. But anyone with experience of ice at sea knows that those very conditions and a moonless night only render the detection of icebergs all the more difficult, and calls for additional alertness on the part of both officers and men. Speaking for myself, I knew only too well that there were chances, if long ones, of sighting an iceberg, but as I reckoned, in ample time to clear it with a turn of the wheel. On that night of April the 14th, we all, that is, the captain and officers, knew perfectly well that we were just about entering the region where ice might be sighted at that particular time of the year, and had taken all necessary precautions. Now, throughout the day, there had been the usual wireless messages from different ships reporting the weather, odd icebergs, and so forth. But as none of these bergs reported lay on our course, well, they didn't directly concern us. But when the evidence came to be sifted out at the inquiry held in London afterwards, it then came out that one very vital message received in the Titanic's wireless room that night had never been delivered to the bridge. That message came from a ship called the Masaba, warning all ships of heavy pack ice, icebergs, and field ice in an area then lying right ahead of the Titanic, and what was still worse, not far away. Those immense quantities of ice were abnormal for almost any time of the year, and the significance we should have attached to that report can hardly be exaggerated. In my opinion, it was a warning of the most vital importance. You see, I was officer of the watch and in charge of the ship when that Masaba message came over, and I know perfectly well what I should have done if it had come to my hand. Without a shadow of doubt, I should have slowed her down at once. That would have been imperative, and sent for the captain. More than likely, in fact almost certainly, he would have stopped the ship altogether and waited for daylight to feel his way through. Anyhow, the long and short of it is, neither he nor I nor any other officer of the ship got that message. Now to go on. We were steaming that night at a good 22 knots. At 10 o'clock, I was relieved as officer of the watch by Murdoch, W.M. Murdoch. He and I had been shipmates in many of the ocean greyhounds, and both of us had crossed this ice region times without number, both in clear weather and what's more in fog. After the usual formalities, I handed over, wished him joy of a few perishing cold hours, went below. I expect his watch went on as mine had done. Nothing to see and nothing to hear except the distant roar of the water at her bows, that and the half-hourly bells with a lookoutman's cry of all's well. Of course, he knew nothing of the death trap lying ahead of us any more than I did. And so 5 bells, 6 bells, and 7 bells went by. But barely 10 minutes had passed after the sound of the last bell when there were 3 sharp clangs on the crow's nest bell, followed by a cry from the lookout cage, "Ice right ahead, sir." Murdoch evidently saw the mass of ice practically at the same time as the lookout men and shouted, "Hard a starboard, full speed astern." His idea was to swing her bow clear and then put the helm hard over the other way and so swing her stern clear. And given half a chance, I believe he'd have done it. But going at that speed, it was too late. As it was, her bow swung a bit, but not enough, and she struck. She took the blow along her starboard side, masses of ice actually falling on the foredeck. But what was worse, though we didn't know that till it came out at the inquiry, she was pierced below the waterline in no less than 6 compartments, and from that moment, nothing could have saved her. I was lying in my bunk when I felt the slight jar, not any sense of collision, but more a kind of shiver that ran through the ship. Anyway, it was enough to bring me out of my bunk in one jump. Out on deck, I ran over one side and then to the other, but there wasn't a trace of anything we'd struck. So back I went to my bunk and just waited. If I was wanted, naturally my cabin would be the first place where anyone sent for me would look. You see, apart from being nearly frozen, even an officer, when off watch, isn't exactly welcomed on the bridge, either in pajamas or anything else. Anyway, it wasn't long before Boxall, the 4th officer, poked his head round my door and said, "You know we've struck an iceberg?" "I know you've struck something," I told him, not thinking it anything serious and feeling none too pleased. Then he said, "The water's up to F deck in the mail room." There was no need for him to say anything more, I was into a pair of pants, sweater, and bridge coat and out on deck almost as soon as he was. Now we've been running under a big head of steam, and the sudden stopping of the engines lifted every safety valve. And as a result, the steam roared off at all exhausts. The row was absolutely deafening. Added to that, the engineers started to blow the boilers down. Shout as loud as you like. No one could hear a word. At the same time that Boxall had called me, the order had been given, all hands on deck. And I met my watch tumbling up on the boat deck just as I got there. And the boat deck, just in case you don't know, is the top deck of all. I got hold of the boatswain's mate and sort of showed him with my hands that I wanted him to start the men stripping off the boat covers. Now, in the merchant service, men are taught to think and, if necessary, act for themselves. They don't wait for pipes or bugles, and I can tell you, the 700-odd survivors that night can thank God they don't. Every man jack just went about his job well as if it were an everyday occurrence. When the boats were stripped and cleared, they were swung out and lowered to the level of the boat deck. Just a little while before they were ready to swing out, I happened to meet the captain, and I asked him, by cupping my hands over his ear and yelling at the top of my voice, "Shall I get the women and children away, sir?" He just nodded, so I started to fill the first boat. Just about now, thank goodness, the roar of escaping steam stopped, and passengers, now they could hear themselves think, started asking me, "Why are you getting the boats out? And why are you putting women and children in them?" I told them it was merely a precaution, and that very likely they'd all be taken on board again at daylight, or at the worst, taken on board the ship everyone could clearly see, only a few miles away. We could see all her lights quite plainly. But here again we were up against it. That ship was the Californian, and though her lights were plain to everyone on board the Titanic, she seemed to pay not the slightest heed either to our wireless calls or to the distress signals we were firing every minute. The reason why she didn't answer our wireless calls, which other ships heard halfway around the earth, was because she only carried one wireless operator. And when we struck the iceberg, he'd just gone off watch, so it was no fault of his. But why no notice was taken of our distress signals, shells that are fired hundreds of feet up into the air to explode with a cascade of stars, heaven only knows. What a chance her captain missed. He could have laid his ship right alongside the Titanic and taken practically every soul on board. However, he didn't, and the two ships gradually drifted further and further apart. And, according to the officer of the watch of the Californian, the Titanic's lights disappeared at 2:40 a.m. They did. And with his own eyes, he'd personally witnessed one of the greatest tragedies of the sea. But to go back again, at the time of getting away the first few boats, no one believed that the ship was actually in any danger. I'm afraid my own confidence that she wouldn't or couldn't sink rather conveyed itself to others, for there were actually cases where women absolutely refused to be put in a boat. I remember one young couple, evidently not long married, walking up and down the boat deck. I asked the girl, she was only a girl, from the western states, I should say, if I should put her in a boat. But no, she wouldn't be parted from her husband. Not on your life, she said. We've started together, and we'll finish together. Brave girl, but she didn't know how near that finish was. Certainly I didn't. As time went on, I could see the bows of the ship getting steadily lower and lower in the water. Now, between lowering one boat and another, I frequently took a run forward and a quick look down a long stairway that led from the boat deck 3 or 4 decks down. Frankly, I'm never likely to forget the sight of that cold greenish water creeping step by step up that stairway. Some of the lights were shining down on water, and others, already submerged, were giving it a sort of ghastly transparency. But for my purpose, I could tell by that staircase measurement exactly what was happening, how far down she'd gone, and how quickly she was going. Just when I first realized how desperately serious things were, I don't know. But I do know that before many boats were away, I got to piling more and more people into them. Partly because I now knew she was going, and partly because the boats were not remaining by the ship to be filled to their full capacity when waterborne. A far easier job than lowering them with their full complement from that tremendous height. Another thing, it was plain to me that if we were going to avoid the unutterable disgrace of going down with boats still hanging at the davits, we got not only to take chances, but we got to work like blazing. I've always admired the coolness and efficiency of merchant sailors in the tight corner, and I've seen a few. But that night, well, the Titanic's men set up a standard that'll never be beaten. Every single boat was filled and lowered from davit head to water and got away without an accident of any kind. And that despite the pitch black night and the conditions we were working under. The same tribute must be paid to the passengers for the courage they showed. For by the time little more than half the boats had gone, I knew, and I'm pretty certain they knew, that she was definitely going down. You've got to remember, the Californian had drifted away. There weren't enough boats to take half the people, and the chances of the other half in that icy cold water were absolutely nil. Yet, there was never the slightest attempt to get into a boat out of turn. In fact, with the last couple of boats, it was even difficult to find women to fill them, though of course there were still a good many on board. Then came the very last boat of all, and it was a sort of raft with collapsible canvas sides, stowed upside down on top of the officers' quarters, and that's above the boat deck. A seaman named Hemming, he'd been with me in many of the mail boats, he and I cut this one adrift and threw it down on the water, which was now about 2 feet above the boat deck. Hemming, by the way, had earlier on given up his place in the boat after being told off to take charge of it, and unbeknown to me, had followed round, helping me with the lowering. A ticklish job even in daylight. Having dumped this collapsible, there was not a thing further we could do on that side, so both of us went over to the starboard side. But we found all the boats were away from there too. Of course, there were still hundreds of people round. As Hemming and I looked down from the top of the officers' quarters, where we were standing, the ship took a sudden dip, and a sea came rolling up, carrying everyone with it. Many were drowned there and then. Everyone that could just instinctively started to scramble up towards the after end of the ship. But that was only putting it off. In fact, it was lessening their chances. The plunge had to come, and that I could see was pretty soon. And no one's chances were going to be improved by getting mixed up in a struggling mass. Hemming, as I found out afterwards, headed for one of the after boat falls, slid down, dropped into the water, swam away, and was eventually saved. For my part, I turned forward and took a header from the top of the wheelhouse. I started to swim away, but got sucked down 2 or 3 times. In fact, I got mighty near the edge of things before I finally came up alongside the collapsible. We'd hove into the water from the top of the officers' quarters, and there I hung on. A bit later, the forward funnel guys carried away, and the funnel, weighing perhaps 50 or 60 tons, fell down with a crash on the water. It missed the raft and some of us hanging onto it, by inches. But there were a good many it didn't miss. Next thing I remember, I was still hanging on to a bit of rope attached to the raft, but some 30 or 40 yards away from the ship. The wash of the falling funnel had evidently picked us up, raft and all, and flung us clear of the ship altogether. Several of us scrambled up onto the slippery bottom of the raft, and it was from there I saw the Titanic sink. As I watched, I could see her bow getting deeper and deeper in the water, with the foremast sticking up above the surface, whilst her stern lifted higher and higher, till it was right out of the water. When she got to an angle of about 60 degrees, there was a sullen sort of rumbling roar, as her massive boilers all left their beds and went crashing down through the bulk's heads and everything that stood in their way. Up to that moment, she had stood out as clear with her rows of electric lights all burning. When the boilers broke away, she was, of course, plunged into absolute darkness, though her huge black outline was still perfectly distinct up against the stars and sky. Slowly, she reared up on end, till at last she was absolutely perpendicular. Then, quite quietly, but quicker and quicker, she seemed just to slide away under the surface and disappear. As she vanished, everyone round me on the upturned boat, as though they could hardly believe it, just said, "She's gone." Some little time later, I found that the senior wireless operator was standing just behind me, and from the wireless messages he told me he'd received from different ships, I figured up in my mind that the Cunard liner, Carpathia, one that he said was coming to our rescue, should be up about daylight. It was then I first heard of the Masalva message, and when I said I didn't remember it, he told me he'd put it under a paperweight at his elbow and never sent it to the bridge. Many died from cold during the night, the wireless operator amongst them, and a mighty long time it seemed before daylight broke, standing wet through and up to our knees in icy water on that upturned boat. Frankly, I don't think many of us expected to see daylight. At one time during the night, someone suggested we should say Our Father, and I don't think it was exactly scare that made everyone join in. But you'd need to be in somewhat the same fix, where a couple of minutes may mean all the difference between, well, here and hereafter, to understand the feeling we put into it. I've heard that prayer ever since I was the height of 6 penitent coppers, but never with such intense earnestness as the surroundings lent to it that night. However, when daylight did break, most of us were still heads up, and we of the upturned boat transferred to one of the lifeboats. At full daylight, there was the Carpathia steaming toward us. I needn't say just what sort of a welcome sight it was either. Cruising slowly round, she collected the boats one by one. Mine, I know, was loaded down to the gunwales, and no easy job to keep afloat in the rising sea. At last, everyone was safely on board, and with the 700-odd survivors of that night, she turned away from that tragic spot and headed for New York.
And that's from 1936. Now, obviously, the audio is a little fuzzy there, but I mean, obviously, it's extremely old. So that was a treat to listen to, actually. That was a gem to find.
Yeah.
I'm glad I was able to find that. I'm glad you brought that up, and I was able to find that, Steve. Because
Yeah, it's a great piece, really is. Yeah.
well, I mean, you hear him say that a lot of interesting information in there. But it's interesting how he thinks that it was that noise was the boilers going, and later on you realize it wasn't the boilers that they heard.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought that was the boilers going. That noise that they heard was the ship ripping in half.
Yeah. Hmm.
That god awful like noise that they described. They thought it was the boilers just flying through the ship because there was nothing in their way.
Yeah.
That was the ship ripping in half. Of the ship, if when he was describing it, I actually could see the scene in the movie where the ship actually breaks apart and it loses all the power,
Mhm.
and the power goes out. I think Cameron did a good he did a good job showing like what happened to the ship when it actually breaks apart into two pieces.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
was
it's pretty
really
good.
That was a really good, really good. I'm glad you brought that up, Steve.
Yeah, Eva Hart has a good piece. I think that's her name as well. There's several of the survivors that have recorded some good testimony about what happened that night. And, she was one of those who said that she had told the inquiry boards that the ship did break in half, and they kept telling her it didn't. And she said, I was on the lifeboats and it did break in half. It sounded like an explosion below the water line, and it began to tear apart. And so, I mean, after all this time, isn't it amazing? I mean, I've heard so many quasi experts tell us that the Californian could have never reached those survivors. And here's the second mate telling you they should have been there. What an opportunity Captain Lord had to save these people and lost it. Now remember, Californian worked for the same company, or basically another JP Morgan operation, IMM, International Merchant Marine. So why they were out there is a question that I have about, why they would be on the east side of that ice flow at that. They left how many days earlier? I would have thought they'd have been long past that by then, and why they were just floating around. And then again, also, why would you want to take a ship like the Titanic even through a small slushy growlers area? Growlers are like little pieces of frozen ice that bang up against the hull. They may not do any damage, but it sure is annoying when you're trying to sleep. I mean, I wouldn't think they'd want to even get even close to any of that stuff. And so apparently, the whole navigation was just really arrogant, if not intentional. They really didn't listen to anybody telling them about that ice flow. Because if you look at the maps, friends, they could have missed 10 icebergs and they would have still hit that ice flow up ahead. California wasn't going through it. They'd shut down for the night and warned people about it. So, yeah, I mean, they had no business at all being anywhere near that. And just a disaster that they navigated themselves right into that mess.
It was a mess. They just ran. They shouldn't have been there to begin with. There's 100 questions that I could ask why they were there, what they were doing. Steve? Let me ask you a question. Why were they meeting with a high-ranking Jesuit? Why did Captain Smith meet with a high-ranking Jesuit priest?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? There was a Father Brown who was on board the ship, and he had his camera equipment and everything like that, and he was told to get off, I think, at Southampton or Queensland, I think.
Yep.
And there's another interesting connection to all of this as well. About 1905, Cecil Rhodes and the Milner Group, the Milner Roundtable Group, formed what they called the Pilgrim Society. And Rhodes had known E.J. Smith, Captain Smith, from the Boer War. And that's where actually Smith had worked for Rhodes and people like that during the Boer War, moving troops. So he had his whole background in military movements for a while. So there's another connection that needs to be looked into the connection between the emergence of the early Pilgrim Society. You can look them up. Some of your listeners, our listeners, will know this at Popeye. But there was also a fellow by the name of Archibald Butt, Butt, Archibald Butt, who was a rather colorful character. He and his male companion were traveling to the Vatican, and they were on their way back. He was a liaison to Teddy Roosevelt in the U.S. Navy, and he was a brave man to the end and honorable. And he also passed away trying to help people get on the lifeboats, and a gentleman and a hero to the end. But, what was he doing at the Vatican at that time? And why was he coming back? There's some real serious questions about what was happening. Was World War I getting, and remember 1912, April, wasn't that far away from the beginning of World War I. And so you had these interests like the Pilgrim Society, Cecil Rhodes, the Milner Group, all these different people. And you have these connections between some very strange people in all this, don't we, Popeye, J.P. Morgan, all these others. Yeah.
Well, again, why did they have all these people, certain people on board, and then try to sink the thing? I'm trying to find. I was trying to see if I can find that scene where the Titanic is sinking. I'm trying to see if I can find a good representation of the Titanic sinking where it breaks in half. But it's so annoying. People on YouTube have all their own like different cut clips. And it's like, God, does anybody just not have it? Man, YouTube really just apocalypsed the hell out of everything. You used to be able to just go on here and find anything, and it's like there's just absolutely nothing on here anymore. And I have to be careful because we're streaming to YouTube, so I can't actually. I just want to see if there's a clip on here of it breaking in half. No, I can't really find anything good on here, and I probably can't find anything on here that would probably not get the stream removed from YouTube anyway.
That happens, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't find anything that wouldn't be copyright unfriendly anyway. But if you watch the movie Titanic, Cameron did a good representation of what it looks like when the ship broke in half. I wanted to see if I could find the video of it, what it looked like. But yeah, I can't find anything. I was going to share it really quick because he did a really good, man. It was just so visual when he was talking about when the ship uprighting itself, and the with, like I said, the noise they thought was the boilers going through the ship. That was the ship ripping in half. I mean, we know now. Back then, they thought it was the ship just went down in one piece.
Right.
I think it was already beyond their comprehension, Steve, that the ship could sink, let alone tear in half. So
that's right. But we've known about false flags, and Herod the Great, the evil king of Judea. He was well known for creating these kinds of things. He'd have a big birthday party, invite all of his friends, lock the doors, and burn it down.
Right, and then burn everything down and murder everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these people do those kinds of things, friends. That's what they do. They've been doing it for many years.
Yeah, it's nothing new under the sun, Steve.
Nothing new.
Well,
characters.
Well, so we started off as a stream just about the submersible, but I knew we were going to get into this because I said to you off air, I know it's gonna dive into the Titanic conspiracy. I'm kind of glad that I mean, I knew I couldn't do a stream about the Titanic or about even anything Titanic related without getting into the Titanic conspiracy with you, Steve. But I knew that I saw this morning and I was like, I have to call Steve.
Yeah, right. It's great. I just popped on and saw your messages. And of course, as I've said before, I have my theories. Is it possible they blew the bottom out of the ship? And that was the plan all along. They were intending to lodge it into the ice flow before they did, but they hit the iceberg and they sat there until the timing went off. I don't know. You know what? It would be really wonderful if I could be proven wrong, Popeye, because if I'm right, that only begins my work You know what I mean? Now we got to go back and we got to really start putting things together. If those plates that they're lying about 3/4 of a mile from the ship are investigated, they find out, as we talked about, there was a slow burning process or something like thermite igniting the cutting up of those parts of the bottom through the keel, right through the middle of the keel, in 3 places, friends, lying up there waiting to be investigated after all this time. And then it was murder. It was mass murder, friends. There's your dust. You know, there's your nanothermite. As we saw, everything. I mean, I don't think anybody has any sense doesn't know by now that World Trade Center 7 came down under controlled demolition. The whole thing, 9/11 was all that kind. This is the kind of stuff these people do. They do these things. It's hard to tell you that, but when you think of all the accidents and all the things that went wrong in this whole deal, how they could have made this kind of a mistake and just sunk that ship. It really bothers me to think that it was all coincidence. I just can't see it going that far. But that's my thought about it in kind of a summation. And we hate to get back to another disaster in that area, but here we go again, right?
Well, as I said, there's nothing new under the sun, and I don't think that. I've said before when we've done shows about the Titanic, I think that they sunk it on purpose. We could cover the different aspects of how they might have done it, whether it was an insurance. We've covered whether it's an insurance job. We've put out the different ideas. There's evidence to show that it could be an insurance job, or it could have been an insurance job rather. There's evidence to show that they sunk it on purpose. And there's evidence to show that there were people on board that they wanted to kill because they stood in the way of the formation of the Federal Reserve banking system, which the guy that owned the White Star Line was a high-ranking founding member of. So, I mean, it's not a leap of logic. Again, you could apply Occam's razor to some of these situations, and the simplest solution is the correct one, which, I mean, the guy owned the White Star Line. So insurance fraud.
Yeah.
He wanted to get these people out of the way because they stood in the way of the formation of the Federal Reserve. I mean, that's a simple solution.
And that's big. Yeah,
but I mean, if you watch take JP Morgan's name away and put in Tony Soprano.
yeah.
Why is it okay to believe that Tony Soprano, a fictional mafioso, would do something like that, but it's not okay to believe that a real life mafioso would do something like that? Just because he wasn't an Italian mafioso, but he was organized crime is organized crime, whether it's through white collar organized crime, through the financial system, and through big business, or if it's through Vinny Boom Bots smoking a cigar, and running a pork store out of in New Jersey.
Sure. I got one more for you though, Popeye. The medical industrial complex.
Well, Rockefeller.
Yeah. Rockefeller. Most people don't know that Rockefeller's old man, JD, the senior, his old man was what they called Old Devil Bill. He was a guy that traveled around selling elixirs and snake oils and stuff. They've always been involved in hokey pokey medicine from years going back. But then, look what's happened now with the whole thing with COVID. I mean, would they actually do that? Yeah, they damn sure would, friends.
Right.
That's who these people are.
Seriously. Right, like, people are like, come on, they wouldn't sink the Titanic. Dude, look what they just did with vaccines. Oh, I probably just got us removed from
Well,
YouTube.
It's hard, it's hard to believe that, people can't, I mean.
Got us removed from YouTube. Look what they did. Look. Anyway, you see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, right. Well, how can you avoid it anymore? It's I mean, you can't tell it. It's amazing that you can't even talk about what's really going on without somebody trying to censor the obvious anymore. It can't be done. We know it's happened here,
Right.
and
But I mean, like if they're willing to like look what just happened in the last couple of years. So like they're willing to do that, but they're not willing to sink a ship or blow up a couple buildings on 9/11. Come on.
right, if they'll do that, friends, they'll do anything. So these people have their agendas, and they will take down as many innocents that they need to accomplish what they want to do, and
Right?
that
They
is a
really do
long-term
not
lesson.
care.
No, they
Right?
don't.
The ends justify the means in their eyes. You have to
That's right.
understand that.
Mhm.
They understand that there will be actual casualties, and they want that because they understand there will be an emotional outcry. So
Yep.
I know it's very sad, but that is the truth. That's not how. I mean, I don't subscribe to that theory. I don't agree with it, but that's the way they are. You know,
They are that way.
I don't agree with them. I don't. I don't. That's not my thinking. I'm just showing you the way they think. Consider Steve and I like history teachers. We're just teaching you something. I don't, I'm sure not many history teachers may agree with Genghis Khan, but they have to teach you about Genghis Khan.
Yes, they do.
Well,
Charlemagne, Genghis Khan,
yep,
Hitler, Stalin, Mao. Yeah,
right.
and now we're seeing what it is in our generation. Well, Popeye, I don't know, buddy, but I think we kind of covered it all. What do you think?
Yep. And hopefully, hopefully we won't get for the last 5 minutes of the show won't get us removed from YouTube, but
Yeah.
probably.
Just
Anyway,
opinions. Just opinions. People.
yeah.
They used to call it free speech.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you never know.
Right.
Oh my Lord.
But I want to
Anyway,
thank you. Thank you for having me on, and we'll just have to follow up, won't we?
yes, we will. We'll follow up. We'll keep an eye on things, and perhaps we'll do another stream on this. We'll see. I'm gonna keep following this whole scenario and see what's going on. I mean, I hope there's a positive outcome. I'm not cheering or rooting for anything but a positive outcome, but I'm being realistic here about the whole scenario. So, we'll see what happens in the next few days. We'll see what happens tomorrow.
Right.
And with that, Steve, I want to thank you for coming on tonight with me, spending 3.5 hours educating the
great
public
show.
about not only about the missing submersible, but about the Titanic mystery itself and all aspects of the Titanic mystery. I appreciate that.
Right. We're going to stay at it.
Yes. And hey, shamelessly plug your Substack.
Oh, yeah. If you want to visit my Substack, it is stevestars.substack.com. I think I'll post this up there, as a matter of fact. When we get a copy of it, I'll do a Substack and send it out to all my other listeners. We got a lot of people listening live tonight, so it's really great to have all the people that hung in there. And yeah, I'll go ahead and put it on the Substack as soon as I can there. Thanks, Popeye.
Of course. Thank you for coming on, my brother. I appreciate you.
Yeah,
It
appreciate
was
you.
fun as always. I love doing broadcasts with you.
We've done a lot of great ones.
Yes, we have. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I love you all. I know Steve does, and I'm going to leave you with some positivity, as I always do. I like to close the show with my favorite quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I love you all, and I will catch you all again soon. We're out of here.